call the March 11th Advisory Committee meeting to order. And the first item on my little list is questions from the public regarding matters not on the agenda. If anybody has a quick procedural question or other question not relating to things we're going to talk about tonight, I'm happy to entertain that. Seeing none. Additional items for the record, we've received, I'll sort of recap this because to be honest with you, I've lost track of exactly when stuff's come in. We have received emails in support of the Ship and Cottage Street Sewer Project. We've received additional emails with respect to the high school fields, and we received today by email some supporting documentation with respect to the Ship and Cottage Street Sewer. The reason, the reason for this little bullet point, just so you know, is we're trying to cut down on the amount of paper that we have in our folders, and so we're using electronic versions of these documents. Nonetheless, these documents are part of our public record. You should know we have them. We should all know we have them. If you want them, you can have them. But we just felt we didn't need additional pieces of paper floating around. Matters not anticipated within 48 hours of the meeting, there are none. We will turn now to votes. So tonight, I've talked to some of you that have asked. We intend to vote tonight on articles with which we have had public hearing sessions. There will be sort of limited opportunity to talk about these things. Really, the thrust of the meeting tonight is for all of us to answer whatever questions we might have before we're ready to take a vote. So I'm certainly not attempting to shut down public discussion, but we've moved along in the process really to the point of a vote. There may be information that we would want to gather from some of the proponents in the audience or other experts, and that's fine. There won't be a great deal of public commentary, just to sort of set the stage for that. And now I'd like to turn to Greg McCune, who is one of the liaisons to the Government Study Committee, to discuss Article S, Treasurer Collector, from elected to appointed.
Thank you, Karen. Just to pick up where I guess we left off the other night with the hearing, I sent out the comment last night. I appreciate perhaps not everybody had a chance to read it, and I did get some feedback from it. I should acknowledge that much of what was in there was actually written by Karen last year when we considered a similar article, so I can't take credit for all the bad stuff was what Karen said.
I'll take all the mistakes.
So the comment, I think, speaks for itself, and I'm obviously going to put forth a motion to recommend that we approve the change to an appointed treasurer-collector. I will point out that Phil Edmondson, who was not at the last hearing, he was out of town on business, and who has been sort of championing this for the Government Study Committee, is here tonight. If anybody has a specific question for Phil, I would assume he'd entertain it. And also Edna English, who represents the minority point of view for the Government Study Committee, is here as well, and certainly, I assume, be willing to speak to that. But frankly, I don't see anything to add to what we've discussed previously and what was in the comment. And Madam Chairman, barring any comments from the committee, I would put forth the motion.
Okay. I think the one thing I guess I'd draw our attention to again is, unlike the legislation that was proposed last year that Scott Ford described for us last week, this legislation can specifically describe what will happen in Hingham. And I think that was the lack of, or let me say it another way, the requirement for very specific, very stark language by the procedure we followed last time around essentially said, when you got into the ballot box, do you want to elect the treasurer collector or do you want to appoint the treasurer collector? And it didn't give you any background. It didn't give you any sense that the incumbent treasurer collector would be protected. Now this year Jean Montgomery happens to be up for election, so her term is expiring anyway. What this special legislation does is allow us to tell the town what will happen with respect to Ms. Montgomery, that her services will continue, and that the role of treasurer collector to exercise discretion within certain boundaries would be respected by the town. That wasn't possible with the procedure that we followed last time around. Any other questions on Article S? Phil?
May I just present one or two pieces of information that I don't believe we presented to the
Sure,
committee?
sure. You know what, I'm going to ask you to come to the mic if you would.
Phil Edmondson with the Government Study Committee. I think it's, rather than, I think you described me as the champion of this, I prefer to think of myself as the shepherd. Because, you know, mostly what I've been doing for the whole time is trying to listen to everybody I can about this issue, and particularly to Jean, and try to find out what works for Jean. She knows about this issue better than any of us ever will. And so a lot of what we've done, including the question of the process, has been because this is the process that Jean supports. And we, early on in the Government Study Committee, out of our respect to Jean and the position, did not want to advocate for any other position or to advocate a proposal to the town that Jean did not support. And she made her wishes very clear, and those are in the details you have. As I said, there's just two points I'd like to add to the others that are under your consideration. One is there has been some economic research done on the question of appointed versus elected treasurers. There was a study done in California by the National Bureau of Economic Research that showed that appointed treasurers get better outcomes for their towns than elected treasurers in terms of the actual rates, the debt rates that are paid on debt raised by those municipalities. In essence, just clear, objective, analytical proof that having the ability to appoint a treasurer in the long run is going to give you a more qualified person. That is going to have real benefits for the taxpayers, and so I hope you will consider that. Consider that it is a limited piece of evidence, but that it is very important, that Jean brought to my attention. And then the second thing is I tried to do a little historical research for you. The offices of treasurer and collector, and in fact at one time they were different offices, were put into effect early in Hingham's history in the 1700s. They were not instituted by means of a vote of the citizenry. They were instituted by a vote at town meeting. However, of course, we all know that town meeting was probably very different then than it is today. I think we all suspect it was a time when a greater percentage of people came to town meeting, and town meeting was a little less of a legislative body and a little more of a pure democratic body. And there are merits to both, obviously. But there is other information. That is, there are several other times that the town has chosen to make very significant changes in its bylaws relating to the office of treasurer and collector. Most recently, two that I will cite, one is in 1936 when the town instituted its present bylaw, as well as changes up to 1996, which was the last time that the bylaw relating to the treasurer collector were changed, were done just by a vote of town meeting, not by a ballot vote. So that doesn't mean that that is paramount in the right process, but as I say, both prior history tells us that this process of making changes like this without a ballot vote is consistent with what the town has done for hundreds of years, and it is, frankly, the wishes of our present treasurer-collector. And so we realize that there are very important considerations that all of you will take in making your vote tonight and how you express yourself. As a shepherd, I'm here because I've tried to weigh those things and try to make the best recommendation that I and my colleagues can make. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Phil. Any questions for Phil while he's...
I have one.
Sure, Dan.
Phil, you mentioned that appointed collectors generally have higher collection rates than elected collectors.
No, they negotiate lower interest rates on their debt. Sorry if I was not clear.
Okay.
So statistically, what this National Bureau of Economic Research did was look at municipalities with elected treasurers and with appointed treasurers. And then they looked at, I'm sure, balanced out or took into effect the differences that these towns might have in terms of their financial ratings. And then they looked at what were the interest rates that they paid on the debt that they raised. And elected treasurers got appointed treasurers negotiated lower interest rates for their citizens. Am I being clear? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sort of, but I guess, okay, and do those appointed treasurers in that survey, do they generally do better than we've done under an elected?
Oh, I don't know. It didn't, all I saw was a summary of the report.
Okay.
So I
So how it relates-
couldn't even begin to evaluate it, honestly.
How it would change or not change things here?
No, I'm just saying, you know, in the big picture, hypothetically, if you're looking at over a long period of time, appointed treasurers get better, lower interest rates for their municipalities than elected do. The judgment of the authors of the study said, of course, that's because the municipalities were able to look at a larger pool of candidates and they were able to hire more qualified candidates who were more effective in their job. You know, as to whether that causality is true or not is up to each of us to decide whether, but it certainly makes sense on the surface of it.
I think the point, though, that you're sort of drawing out is, I think we have been very successful, right, in our interest rates, and I guess I might think part of that is because the current treasurer collector is integrated into the financial management of the town, and my concern is that we shore that up for the long term, that we make sure that whoever holds this position and however they get there can be part of that financial leadership, because I think that's what's in the best interest of the town. And so one route would be to, take your chances with an elected position, and another route would be to have that position appointed where you could, specify qualifications and money. So.
Thanks, Karen. That's much more clear.
No, this echo is driving me a little crazy.
All right.
Sorry. All right. Jim.
So according to this article, the treasurer collector is a direct line of report to the selectmen. They're not really as independent as I would think or would want them to be.
I would think that the treasurer collector would be treated like a department head.
Yes, but it's very important there's a sentence in the article, I believe, or in the vote that refers to the, I don't have it in front of me, but the state mandated obligations and responsibilities of the treasurer. Perhaps do you see that in there? Do you see a sentence to that effect?
I'm just reading through it. The town treasurer for period, town collectors may establish an employment contract with the town treasurer collector. So I'm seeing a contract, appointed by the selectmen. I'm looking for where it says they have some independence in the position.
All right. Here it is. It's the third sentence in section 1. The town treasurer collector shall have and exercise all the powers and rights, perform the duties, and be subject to the liabilities and penalties conferred and imposed by law on town treasurers and town collectors of taxes. This was very important to Jean Montgomery. She felt that this was critical to maintaining her independence, that it was very clear and part of the vote that even in an appointed situation, she or any future treasurers would be operating under the mandates of the laws that outline the responsibilities of the treasurer collector. So if, for example, one of those mandates from the state might be, you were supposed to go out and get the best bids on the interest rates on bonds that the town might set, and if I can't imagine this happening in Hingham, but if instead the treasurer collector received political pressure that said, gee, we'd like you to use this investment bank or something to that effect, the treasurer would still have the independence to be able to raise his or her hand and say, no, I do not have to do everything the selectmen tell me to do, because first and foremost, I have to follow the responsibilities of my position under the law. That's the way Jean has described it to me, and not that specific example, but that general concept in that this sentence is very important and meaningful to her.
Any other questions? I believe there's been a motion. And there will be a motion.
There will be a motion. It's rather lengthy. Should I read the whole thing, or?
No.
Therefore, I will recommend, I will move that we recommend favorable action on this article as written.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor of the Article S, elected to appointed treasurer collector as written, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no?
No.
Okay, let's have a show of hands. Does anyone wish to be, so 3? Oh, I'm sorry. Would anyone wish to be recorded? Bill does. Want to be recorded?
I'll be recorded, but I'll let Bill take it at the appropriate time. He kind of convinced me last week, so.
Anyone else?
Take it away, Bill.
So what was the vote there?
The vote was 10 in favor, 4 against, 2 of the 4 against recorded.
Okay, thank you.
Wait,
Wait, no, I don't think that's right.
Laura, I
Yeah.
think
We-
it's-
Laura-
I'm sorry, 9 in favor, 4 against.
With 2 recorded
Yes, with 2 recorded.
and 1
And 1 abstention, thank you.
recusal, actually, I think.
Recusal, yes.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming back yet again. So now I'd like to move to Articles Y, Z, A, B, B, unless there's anybody here for the Whitney Wharf easement. So I'd like us to be able to talk about these articles and ask questions about them all together. I think the school folks at my request have brought some of the pictures back. I'm wondering if you could maybe, I may use one of these easels, but if you don't mind putting maybe a picture of the project up there, I think it's helpful. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna put some stuff up on the whiteboard because I'm a visual learner, and I tried to channel my inner John Asher today and come up with PowerPoint presentations that would sort of set this forth in a very neat package, and it was failing me. So, you know, my takeaway after the last meeting was to try to put these articles together in a way that made sense and in a way that we could act on them and that town meeting would understand what town meeting was voting on under each of the articles. And I took it as a to-do because it seemed pretty easy until you get home, right, and you start piecing together the different combinations of what could happen when. And for somebody who's challenged in math, this scenario quickly became an algebraic equation to me. Because of the different moving parts and because of town meeting's ability to say yes or no to various pieces of this, right? So as I thought about it, so I stepped back, way back from, you know, last spring when the school committee was charged with forming an ad hoc committee, way back beyond, you know, all of the deliberations by the ad hoc committee, all of the deliberations by the school committee, all of the deliberations by the planning board, the Board of Health, and the Conservation Commission, way back to take a look at the structure of now what town meeting's being asked to consider. And so when I did that, I thought, I'm sorry for some of you, this is going to be, you know, like the 3rd time you've heard it. When I stepped back from that, I looked at the project with a capital P as being, on the school side, as being Y plus Z plus AA, an equation. That's what, I thought that was me. That's what on the school side has been discussed. That's what on the school side has been permitted. That's what the usage policy speaks to. It speaks to the project, which is Y plus Z plus AA. Now, because we all promised, we all part of Special Town Meeting 2011, we all promised each other that instead of the project Y plus Z plus AA, we would come back with some choices. We would segment the project into choices that town meeting could have, particularly with respect to the installation of lights and the installation of a turf playing surface. So because of that promise we made to each other, it becomes a little more complex to think about, well, how do these things that fit together, right, and that we've talked about together, how do you pull them apart and make sure everybody understands, you know, what pieces are falling into place here. So my crack at this, and so then on the other side of the equation, kind of all encompassed in an article, is BB, which is the petitioner article, which asks us to consider, I think, a smaller bleacher complex, smaller concession building, no lights, so it doesn't give town meeting a choice on that, it just says no lights. And I think at this stage of the game, given the drainage issues on the site and the Title IX compliance issues, I think what I heard from the citizens last time around was it does include a turf playing surface, right? Back to the school side articles, the way I've considered this and the way I think Tom has developed the appropriations is that Y for the project includes the project that has been described. And why, you know, I think why Ray's enumeration, of the school committee's enumeration of all the different aspects of the project are ticked off in Y. And if you want copies of that, I think, Sue, are they on the table? So if people don't have copies of the text and you want to see the text, please come up and get a copy. So it includes the project, and the project necessarily includes a turf playing surface. The reason I say that is not without a lot of thinking about it, but the multi-purpose playing field, to me, it doesn't exist without a turf playing surface. You can't play, I don't think, you can't play two different sports on the same grass surface during the same season. It just won't work, right? So in order to have a multi-purpose playing field, I think that necessitates a turf playing surface, right? So the way we've constructed Y, for the moment, is Y is all that stuff except the cost of the turf carpet, okay? So that appropriation figure is, tell me again, Tom, for what?
$3,765,180.
180. Okay. So that, just so everybody's clear, that builds the project, that builds all of the stuff you see ticked off here, except the turf carpet.
And except lights.
And except lights, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Very good, Jim, you're paying attention.
The project in Y does not include lights.
That's correct. That's correct. So to get to the turf playing surface, you then go to Z. And what Z asks the town is, listen, you told us to go off and figure out what to do with the space that we have, to solve the drainage problems, to fix the bleachers, and to come up with a compliant field that meets the requirements of Title IX. And we did that. And that means a turf playing surface. We're going to ask you separately, however, if you want to pay for the turf playing surface. That's what Article Z does. So Article Y would authorize the school committee, would authorize the town to raise, appropriate, borrow, or transfer from available funds to be expended under the direction of the school committee and appropriation to be used for the project. No lights, but contemplating privately funded turf. Z says, do you want to pay for the turf? Yes or no? The appropriation under Z from the town we would request would be
$454,020.
So here's what happens. You get up at town meeting, let's say hypothetically Y passes. What Y does is gives the school committee that amount of money to go build the project, but no money for turf. Now we come to Z. If Z passes, the school committee has a project that looks like Y plus Z. It looks like the project plus payment for the turf playing surface. Let's say the town says, no, we think turf's an amenity, notwithstanding your description of the project. We think turf's an amenity, we're not going to pay for it. Where are we left? We're left with Y. Y is an appropriation for everything but the turf playing surface. So the project is permitted and described, can go forward, but only with private funding for the turf. And then AA comes to the lights, and so Y and Z are appropriation articles. They need to pass town meeting by 2/3. AA is a request for the sense of the meeting with respect to lights. Will you allow us to put lights in? Ask the school committee. Town meeting can answer that question. That needs to pass by a majority of town meeting. So my to-do takeaway was, what numbers are we voting for, and what are we voting for, particularly under Y and Z? I think AA is pretty self-explanatory. So that's where I came out, and those are the numbers that Tom Piles has before you.
Thank you.
Have I confused everybody but me?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So let me just try to reiterate and ask a question. So why contemplates a project with a field, but the town isn't paying for the field. Is that correct?
Isn't paying for the turf.
Okay, well, I guess where I'm hung up then is that we heard from Gale Associates that the cost of another kind of field, which is really the only other kind of field you could have is grass, is actually substantially higher than they had previously represented because of the drainage infrastructure work you need to do in order to install a grass field. So is the difference really, so to go to, under Y, is there really 3.765 million with grass? And Z, is the difference really 454,000 between grass and turf?
So this is exactly what I spent my weekend. And I would say you're exactly right. And I would say that if we were going to send the school committee off to build a grass field, let's call the project a $4 million project, because again, I'm bad at math. Sorry, Dr. Gallo. Let's call it a $4 million project with a turf surface. Along your lines, got the sense that if we sent them off to build a grass field, we'd be spending nearly $4 million to build a grass field because of the difference in the drainage that would need to occur. The other issue I have with the grass field and the reduction appropriation is the Title IX issue. So if we're saying, right, if we're saying we need to provide our male and female athletes with substantially the same playing experience, right? And if you take for a minute my assertion that it would be really, really difficult to play two different sports during one season on the same field. So you have the football guys out there digging up the grass field, and then you send the field hockey young women out there to play on that field. I just don't think it can be done. So if you are willing to take that leap with me, then I'm thinking to myself, well, doesn't that mean we need to construct two grass surfaces that offer substantially the same playing experience, which means if you provide for one playing experience, seating for our guests, a scoreboard to show the score, and a clock to show you how much time is left in the game, don't you need to do that for two grass playing surfaces? So I agree with you, Jim, that if you go down the road of saying why really should be the project with grass, I think it's a very different cost profile than we've anticipated at all. And the reason I backed up from that, and correct me if I'm wrong, is all along, most recently I've heard this project, the way it has been described, doesn't work unless you have turf. So to me, it seems silly to put before the town meeting, a grass alternative. Because if it's not going to be grass, if this project can't be grass, I felt funny asking town meeting to vote for a hypothetical grass field.
Trying to absorb all this. I think I've got it. The $3,765,180 is really a project with no field.
Yep.
Neither grass nor artificial.
Right.
No. It's a project with synthetic turf that the synthetic turf is paid for privately.
So it's
But not included in that figure.
That's correct.
But not included.
Everything prepared.
Everything but the synthetic turf would be paid for out of this appropriation.
But it can't stand
Sub-base
alone.
drainage.
Everything.
No.
Wait
Well,
a second.
No, right, yeah, sorry, I was talking, right, I'm sorry.
So, Article Y, $3,765,180 includes a parcel that's prepped for artificial turf, absent the artificial turf.
No. Can I try
Yeah,
this one?
jump in.
I think the way that you ought to look at it is look at it as a project that is Y and Z. The total cost of the project is the cumulative effect of dollars of Y and Z, which is approximately $4.2 million. Okay?
Yep.
That's delivering the project complete with everything, synthetic turf, absent lights. all we're doing in Z is asking for the appropriation of the $454,000, which is part of the $4.2 million, to be paid for by the town. If you reject Z, which is the turf being paid for by the town, the project is still $4.2 million, but only $3.7 million is being paid for by the town.
Got that. I think we've got to be very clear, though, of what that 425 represents.
So that was my question, I guess, to Tom, is I was understanding that some of what's in the $3.7 million that would be appropriated under Y would include some of the drainage features. It certainly includes.
It includes them all. It includes all of that.
Okay.
It includes all of that.
So
The 454 is basically the carpet.
So I think, coming back to your
So I
point, is
thi-
right,
so-
so.
So I think that what I said was correct. It's a prepared surface, all drainage, everything that you need to put in the artificial turf, except the artificial turf.
No,
hasn't been.
no, the artificial turf would be there. It would just be paid for privately.
But how do we, I guess here's the question I've got, Tom. The warrant article several years ago specifically separated out artificial turf. If I were to ask somebody to pay for the artificial turf, I think we've got to be able to explain what that cost includes and doesn't include.
So I thought, Tom, that Y included, that the $3.7 million included certain of the design, permitting, and drainage costs, and that the 454 was just the appropriation for the carpet and the installation of the carpet.
That is correct. But if you reject Z, you still have all of it.
Right.
And that $454,000 is part of the project, and all of the work has been done. It's just that the $454,000 would be paid for privately,
Right.
Which is the carpet.
which is basically,
Is it your
Clearer
question?
to say there's
Can you make sure
no,
you put the microphone? Sorry.
is it clearer to say there's no grass option?
we are not presenting a grass option.
So if somebody wants grass, not because of cost, because of environmental reasons or whatever, they no longer have that option. Is that correct?
They don't have that option under these articles.
And wasn't that what was in the thing, that they were going to be given the choice, the townspeople were going to be given the choice in that warrant article?
So here's how I thought about that. First of all, let me say this at the outset too, and I have his permission to do this. It's Mike Puzo's opinion that these three articles as written are responsive to the 2011 town meeting directive. So it's the moderator's position that these three articles do what town meeting in 2011 asked the school committee to do. So to your point, I was there too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways I stepped through this and thought that these two options for Y and Z were actually more optimal for the town, gave the town a greater choice, is because if I think if we step through it the other way, and we assume Y is grass, right? So let's assume there's another article, just to further confuse things, right? Let's assume Y is grass.
Okay.
So that's, let's say it's a $4 million project with a $500,000 discount for grass, or a $3.5 million project, plus an add back, right? And we don't actually know what that add back is, but that's gonna be significant.
Right.
Let's call it, for ballpark purposes, which I think are low, $250,000 off the top added back, right? So that's the grass option. And so then, let's say there's another warrant article that responds to that particular request. Town, do you want turf, yes or no? And town says, town says no. So then, Z becomes moot because you're not gonna pay for it, I guess.
But I guess it's just, is it false advertising that we told the town that they would have a choice, and now we're saying, well, actually, you don't have a choice?
Mike?
I guess the way I thought about it in 2011 when it came up was, it was acknowledged that we had a facility, a sports complex next to our high school that had not been invested in, that was badly in need of repair and improvement for a number of reasons. And the study committee, the ad hoc committee was set up to try to figure out what the best solution was. And at the time, we didn't know if it was going to be grass, or we didn't know if it was going to be turf. And there's been a tremendous amount of work and vetting and study done that, to me, from what I heard the other night, that given the durability and maybe the cost, that, you know, we didn't know that when the study was first set up, but after, you know, a year plus of studying this, we now have learned that perhaps turf is the better option than natural grass for a variety of reasons. And so to me, I don't think it's false advertising. I think that we set up a study committee because at the time we didn't have all the answers. We didn't know what the right path to pursue was. And so, you know, a lot of work's been done, and when you think about the fact that we set up the grass field, well, it's got to be seeded and it's going to sit there and not be used for some period of time. And we're making a big investment as a town. And to me, I look at this investment and think that, you know, the way we get our return is that it gets used. If it sits and isn't used, then we want to maximize the usage of this facility, because that's why we're spending the money on it. And we couldn't have known when the study committee was set up what necessarily was the best way to proceed, and that's why the study committee was set up. So I don't feel like it's false advertising. I feel like we were set up to come up with a solution to a problem, and through a lot of hard work, we've come up with a solution, and that solution is turf, not grass.
I would just add, I think there's also a more fundamental thing, which is, you know, back in 2011, I think we were thinking of turf and lights as, you know, I know people don't like the words amenity, but as something that was an extra. I don't think that we had any sense of the engineering and the complications with the drainage. And I think what has emerged, at least from what I heard last week, is that the turf field is not nice to have. It is a necessary part of fixing the drainage. So, you know, it's a little bit different from, you know, do you want a CD player in your car, yes and no? This is actually a component to addressing the drainage issue, which makes it a little tougher, I think, to decouple this. And I think that's an important part of the consideration, because, you know, as my experience, that the ad hoc committee went about its charge looking for delivering to town meeting on options and choices, and that the engineering and the condition of the site drove some different decisions.
I also think it's important to have us take a look at Margaret's memo that she sent around this morning, because I found that very instructive on the rationale for a synthetic turf. I had heard all of the explanations, I'd sat through all of the meetings, but I think Margaret did a wonderful job of saying she really doesn't believe that natural grass is an option for a lot of reasons.
Laura?
I'm not necessarily disputing, I'm not sure we're arguing whether we want turf or grass now. I think what I want to address is the article, and I think it might be clearer to simply state there's no grass option in some way, that this does not provide a natural grass turf option. And I think that would be accurate.
I frankly think it's, and this is what I was trying to say, and I lost my train of thought, Lizzie. I think if we introduce grass in Y and we price Y with grass, we're actually giving the town less of a choice under Z, because Z becomes cheaper. Do you see what I mean? So if what we're saying is you've got to pay for the incremental cost of turf. Right now, so right now I'm saying, right now the way we've laid it out is you've got to pay for the whole turf carpet. That's going to be your cost. And so the town can either agree to pay that $454, or that would be the school committee would have to privately fundraise for that. To the extent we place grass in Y, which isn't the intent of the project, but if we place grass in Y to give town meeting a choice on grass, we actually place greater cost on town meeting under Y. than we would under this scenario.
I understand it, but for some people, I'm not sure it's about the cost. It's about
Right.
other things. And I think that last year, I don't have the warrant, Dan has the warrant, the implication was that people would have a choice, the town would have a choice. And I understand that you've done a lot of education, you've learned, but I think what you need to do is get up and tell the townspeople that, to be direct and straightforward and honest, why this is. But I still think that they should have the option of grass. I think that that's not right. If there are a lot of, if there were a lot of parents who suddenly said, I don't want my kids for environmental reasons on that turf field, I don't think anybody did that, but I.
Go ahead.
If you do.
Yeah.
Okay. As a matter of process, I definitely agree with Lizzie. And I'll come to some of what you said in a minute, Karen. I guess to begin at the end, like you, Bill, last week, this was said after you left the room, Mr. Hoffman. Tom Hoffman sold me on on turf being the best surface. I had heard everything that was said up to that point, and I didn't really take exception to it so much, but just the way he described it as a really, really practical thing, not even as an engineering thing, but once it's built, this field is going to be a beast. You can do anything to it, and it's not going to be twice as productive as other fields. It's going to be 3 times as productive as other fields. I don't even like turf. I didn't like to play on it. Even now, I think after rain, it's like a sauna. In the sun, it's like a griddle. They're too big, the crown is too much, and they're ugly. That's how I feel about turf fields. But if this is what but you're the guys, the schools know what they want for a field, so I wouldn't insert my preference for a type of field on those subjective measures. And just as a capital asset to beat any capital asset for this situation, Tom summed it up, to my satisfaction, why it should be a turf field. However, that's on the merits, on the outcome. I think a lot of what we're talking about here is getting process and outcome mixed up. If these articles, in the opinion of the moderator, suffice to carry out the instructions of town meeting October 24th, 2011, then looking what they say, Article Y talks about construction of a multi-purpose field. And it doesn't say anywhere in here that it has to be a multi-purpose turf field. If you read this in connection with and I can read excerpts from the articles from that town meeting, clearly it was going to be one type of surface or another, and it wasn't determined yet. And this article, even when drafted, left the question open. And I think I suppose we do this in our recommended motion, we close off an option that the article, by its terms, is supposed to leave open, the way I read it. No offense. I agree with your comment, Karen, about how even as a financial matter, the natural grass field becomes sort of not worth it just because of the associated expense. But I respectfully, Mary, I disagree that it's not an option, because what I understood the fellow from Gale Engineering to be saying last week was that you could have a natural grass field there with the same underneath type drainage system, but that he couldn't put a price tag on it right now. So it's doable, but it's, does it make sense as a matter of cost? Probably not. So I guess I come down on the merits on the issue of the turf field being better, but I really think what we've been talking about doing up until the time Lizzie spoke was taking away a decision the town meeting is supposed to have. And I think all of the expertise that the people in the ad hoc committee and elsewhere have developed, it's time for town meeting advocacy. If you're right, go to town meeting and get them to agree. But don't tell them they can't have the choice that they very reasonably understood they were going to have. I won't do this at great length, but what the article says from 2011, when it gets to part 3, which was develop a phase 2 design and construction documents, it was to gather public input, develop both options and cost estimates. And then it got to the details of what there were going to be options and cost estimates for. Required activities, meaning things you have to get estimates for. Completing a site survey, conducting parking noise, lights, and synthetic turf studies. It was to be studied, okay? And then the base recommendation, referenced a couple paragraphs later, a base recommendation for addressing drainage and parking issues, replacing the bleachers, and providing a multi-purpose game facility. Not of one type or another, just and so there were going to be cost options for the base package, and then if we describe them, the amenities. And then the field committee and the school committee will consider and make recommendations on the inclusion of additional features, including lights and synthetic turf. So they can be making a recommendation, but to say we're going to put an article in front of them that takes away the ability to choose something that I would vote against, I think as a matter of process, is not what we should be doing.
May I respond to Lizzie's point?
Sure, and then Lucy's had her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Lizzie, let's take the hypothetical parent of a daughter who plays field hockey. And the parent is opposed, for whatever reason, to playing on turf, artificial turf. Would the parent prohibit his daughter from playing away games? Because it seems everybody else is playing on turf.
No, and it's not, and I think my thing is
Hang on
with
one
Dan.
second. Can you make sure you're talking into the microphone?
Oh,
Sorry.
my concern is not, I actually probably favor synthetic turf, but I think it's about the process that we gave people. We told them they would be able to choose, and then we basically said, oh, no, you can't have that. You know, we've decided this is better, and we've decided, and you can no longer make that choice. I think it's the process. It's not about the synthetic stuff. And I don't know. I mean, I do know that there are parents who don't want their children playing on synthetic turf. Do they then therefore not allow their children to play on fields? I don't know. But what I'm saying is for the process, we told the town at town meeting when we asked them for the money for the study, these would be the options, and now as a process, we've taken that away.
I guess
I guess that's...
Lucy.
Just going back to the cost for a minute, we said a week ago that the cost would be $325,000 per year for debt service. Now, if the town votes yes on Z and agrees to fund the turf, I think Tom told me that would be another $39,000.
Yeah, if you look at the draft that was in your package tonight, that includes the $39,000.
So we're talking about adding $39,000 to the $325,000, and the $325,000 became $350,000 because of the possibility of purchasing some property, and so the debt service is up to $350,000. Right, a separate issue, but I'm saying, I'm looking at the debt service that we've added to this year. We're up to, I think, a $350,000 debt service for two different issues, one very small. This would push it up again. Do we have provisions to absorb that?
Yes.
Okay, and what are we doing to absorb that?
Because in reality, the borrowing for fiscal 14 for the field project would be dramatically less than the 325 or 325 plus the debt service on the 454. It allows for a principal payment to be made in FY14 that would not be required. So in terms of affording it within the forecasted appropriation in the approved budget, we can do that.
Because going forward, look, the forecast was very favorable for the out years, so that by the time we get around to paying it, it would not be an issue.
That would be the hope, yeah, if I had a crystal ball.
And the dollars that you're talking about from a maximum standpoint are just the first year, because the principal goes down and actually the debt service goes down because the principal goes down.
Okay, thank you.
Just to comment on, the choice issue that we gave everybody back in 2011. And I want to go back to the mindset we had in 2011 before everybody learned everything that we now know. To me, it was not just, it was a question of the town would pay for the base project. But when we got into the extras, and at that time, turf was like a real extra. It was going to be, the Mercedes instead of the Volkswagen or something like that. And so therefore, the lights and the turf became these extra things that we would not ask the town necessarily to put in the base cost to fund. That if we would have them, we would ask them, we would just do the funding differently. So I think, to me, that's what Z is doing. It's saying, we want a turf field, but will the town pay for it? Because at the time, we thought grass was much cheaper, that the front-up costs of turf field was very expensive, and we wouldn't consider that base. And so, to me, it was more a financial choice than it was a material choice. And I don't know, I may not have heard a lot of the grass issue about, you know, the environmental issue on the turf. But to me, at the time, it seemed like it was what the town should pay for and what was over and above what the town thought was appropriate for them to pay for. And then turf was an extra.
And I guess, you know, to your point, Dan, in trying to sort of reconstruct the mindset of the 2011 town meeting, you know, I think if you go on to read that paragraph that talks about the inclusion of light and turf, it also says that citizen hearings will be conducted where these aspects of the project are considered, right? And I went to some, I didn't go to all. You know, you probably went to more than I did, but I don't recall hearing the discussion of no turf because I don't want turf as a playing surface. I did hear people being concerned overall about the cost of the project, and this is one way to reduce the cost of the project borne by the taxpayer. And I respectfully do think it gives a meaningful choice, and frankly, monetarily, a more meaningful choice to construct the articles in this fashion. Just because the dollars under Z become greater.
I realize that, but that doesn't quite meet my objection, but that's okay.
A question. I mean, if I remember a town meeting, in our discussions at this table for the special meeting, was that there would be a menu of options. And I understand the deliberations, choices, but I think the perception of this committee then and the town meeting was that there'd be some menu of options available to the town. That being said, if this town decides that they don't want to pay for the turf field or they don't want a turf field, my understanding from the past meetings, it was the intent of the school committee to put in a turf field through private funding anyways. So the option disappears to begin with. I mean, there isn't really the choice of having a turf field if the town says no. Am I correct or incorrect?
You know, I think the project that's been described is Y plus Z. I think the project that's been permitted is Y plus Z.
Right.
So
Understood. The next question is, it comes down, a lot of this, like everything else in life, down to the cost, the bottom line, what is the cost? Knowing that we've passed a large budget this year, knowing that probably it's not going to go down in the foreseeable future, in the next coming years, how are we going to, where is the money going to come from to maintain this project so that it doesn't run down, it doesn't deteriorate? Where would that money come from? Is it, and what is that cost going to be?
well, I mean, I think that's maybe, you know, Dan picked up on some of that from the discussion that Mr. Hoffman has shared with us, as well as at some of the ad hoc committee meetings. I might ask somebody to stand up and talk to this, but I thought, again, one of the selling points for me in terms of investment in a capital asset and what do you want that capital asset to be was the fact that the maintenance costs on a year-to-year basis were less than the maintenance costs, and you couldn't compare maintenance costs on a one-for-one. At the very least, you had to compare it on a 1-to-2 or a 1-to-3. Can I ask somebody to stand up to that, Carol? Hang on, Jim.
Okay.
Can I ask you to? Who are you, sir?
Dennis Friedman, 445 Cushing Street, speaking for the school committee. So because people in the past on the advisory committee have been very concerned about the life cycle costs, we specifically asked Gail to present a life cycle cost not through one life, but two lives of a replacement. And on that basis, and I can go over all the numbers if you'd like, the life cycle cost of a turf field is actually less than a grass field. Not putting aside the fact that in order to replicate the playing experience and so forth, you'd have to have more than one grass field, which we don't have room to do. I mean, I'm glad to go through it with you if you'd like, but what Gail did was go through all the costs of maintenance and the costs of replacement of the field working on a 15-year life cycle. So if it's a cost question, I was just going to say, if it's a cost question, a turf field is actually lower cost in the long run than a natural grass field.
Understood. I'm talking about maintaining all 26 acres. I know the multi-purpose field, although I have heard stories of turf fields not lasting as long as predicted. I'm talking about taking care of a baseball field and its facilities, a softball field, the soccer fields or the grass turf fields on the other side of Unit Street, as well as the other side of the parking lot. Everything, the bleachers, everything. Where is the money to maintain all the athletic facilities? Where would that come from? The increase, what would it be and where would it come from?
Jim, we currently do that today. We currently maintain all 26 acres today. And what we do is when we rent out our fields, all monies are deposited into a revolving account that we then use to maintain what we have. So that would continue. And hopefully we'll be able to rent out the multipurpose field at a greater rate than we currently do our fields now because we have to rest them. And that's what we'll use to maintain the fields. It's
You know, the other point on turf, and I'll get to you, Mike, that, again, as I've evolved over this, because, you know, I guess I want you to know, I did stop. I did back all the way up, and I did then come all the way forward. The other piece of this that I found persuasive was the fact that it seemed like the citizens petition evolved, too, into a turf playing surface. So the consideration was, you have a particular space with particular drainage issues and particular playing requirements, how are you going to make that work? And it seemed to me to evolve to the point where to make it work, you know, there were certain aspects of the project that had to go forward. The question then becomes who pays for those aspects. And to me, you know, I'm hearing you that you don't believe that's a sufficient choice. And for me, I think stepping through this, I think that is a sufficient choice, and I think that's the most material choice for the town. But I can appreciate that we disagree on that.
I'd also like to point out, if possible, what changed since that warrant article was written is we did not have our Title IX report. So we had to take that into account when we were developing this plan.
I think Mike's hand was up.
I just had a quick question for you, Carol. So seems to be a lot of times when the current field has not been usable, and we've had to go to other towns and use other facilities, and we've had to pay for that.
Right.
Right? And so I'm just wondering, so first question is, in that analysis Dennis referenced, are all those costs of renting out other fields even incrementally included in the cost of the grass? Plus, if the grass field takes a couple years to get up to full speed, that's going to be, again, an upfront cost that is above and beyond what's
right
in those numbers, right?
No, so we haven't actually projected that out, but I can give you an example that happened this week. Hingham Sports Partnership just agreed to rent Cohasset Sports Complex for our girls and boys lacrosse teams so that they could have tryouts. So it does happen. That costs $1,000, but we haven't projected that out at this point.
Karen?
Oh, sorry. I'd like to get back to the financial end a little bit, because my understanding is that turf is pretty much a wash, because the money that you save, thank you, Carol, the money that you save annually, the idea is that you save it and eventually it pays for the replacement. So that's kind of a wash, right?
Right, so it costs $28,000 a year to maintain a natural grass field.
Right.
Multipurpose field replaces 2 to 3 fields, as Mr. Hoffman likes to point out. So maintenance of a synthetic field is $1,000 a year. You mow it, not mow it, but you
Maintain, whatever.
Brush it twice, vacuum it.
So I guess what I'm trying to get at, I think there will be additional costs, though. There must be some cleaning of bleachers. There's going to be heating for the new concession stand. The lights will cost money, just to keep the lights on, and I think there's going to be additional lighting out to the parking lot. And I've heard that you're going to charge fees for that, which I think makes sense. Oh, police details now, too. But I don't think we have an understanding of those. I don't think, actually, you've demonstrated that you have an understanding of the additional costs. And I've heard two things that sort of contradict each other, that, that you'll charge people to pay for it. Then I've also heard, but the nonprofits will have to make sure it's affordable for them. And I think if that's the way it's going to be handled, what you're really saying is we're going to ask the town to subsidize them on an ongoing basis. So I would have appreciated sort of an understanding of what your ongoing costs are going to be, what you think you're going to be able to, you have a whole lot of history of rental income, and you know what the costs are in most of your existing fields, so it's really this one. And I haven't seen any demonstration of an attempt really to understand and rationalize those costs.
Well, we do have we do know what it costs to run the lights at Lynch, so we've used that as a basis. But, you know, until we develop what we're going to charge for the fields, knowing that we're going to have it, we won't be able to estimate, you know, what those revenues are going to be. But typically right now we have a balance in our revolving account for the fields. We use it as we need to fix items, and it would be priced appropriately.
And do you see any notion that you'd increase user fees, or you'd examine? I mean, Laura's point's a good one. I mean, you're going to have this kind of new complex that you're going to have to.
So it's at policy right now. It's at the policy subcommittee. They're under review. The issue with that is not knowing what we're going to have and having limited fields to rent out, because the fields that we will be having natural grass on need a 2-year growing period. So we need to take that into account in our revenue generation.
You mean like the baseball field?
Yeah, the baseball, yeah.
2 years before you can use it?
Right. That's the growing period for any natural grass field. You can't use them for 2 years.
Well, I don't know.
And I think that goes to Mike's question. Have we figured out what we're going to do? Like with the track, NDA allowed us to use their track when we were, you know, in construction there. So it's reciprocal. It's on our plates. It's, you know, we just haven't really sat down and figured it out yet.
Well, I don't know what you could do at this point, but I do think it would be nice to have sort of an understanding and a rationalization of your costs and your expected. You do have sources of revenue in this project, and it would be nice to know how they match up. And then I'd like to touch on a little bit again about the debt service, because you know, we do on advisory have a responsibility to take a look at the annual debt service, and we are scheduled next year, as we all know, to go over our debt service limit, which we raised 2 or 3 or 4 years ago because we were over our previous debt service limit. And I think that we should take seriously, you know, when you consider the turf and adding on to that debt service limit again, you know, at what point do our guidelines require us to take action? And I think that the timing of the way this evolved over the course of the year sort of left us, you know, having perhaps prioritized this project over other things where we might not have if we had known we were, you know, we were saving money to go over a debt service limit or something like that. And I'm a little troubled at the way it all went down, and I would ask everyone to consider whether, you know, in this body it is prudent to consider again adding to our debt limit, or if there are any way that we can limit the amount that we're adding to it, whether that would be a responsible decision. And I also would ask us to consider the commitment that we made to funding some capital projects next year that may require debt, which would again add to our debt service. And I would just throw that into the mix, because I think it's important that we separate our emotional attachment to certain things and our objective responsibilities.
Can I say something on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with Laura. I'm, you know, I try to step back and take sort of the bird's eye view, and I look at us, and we are basically climbing out of an economic sort of, not hole, but, you know, a very difficult period, and we finally have money coming in, and we have a huge number of infrastructure issues and needs, and I think that we have buildings, we have vehicles, particularly safety and emergency vehicles. We have even our school infrastructure, the school system infrastructure. We have a lot of things that we have kind of put off for years. We didn't totally fund our capital outlay budget. And I guess when I look at helping run this town, I look at the way it would be if it were my house, and if I was coming out of a difficult time and I know I needed a new car like we need a new field, I'm not sure I would go out and buy the Rolls Royce. That I would be much more interested in maybe also fixing the roof that's leaking or the boiler that's not working, and not spending quite so much. I would do what I needed to get around, i.e. do the fields the way we can do it, but do we need really all of this? And I ask this because we are looking at a lot of big costs down the line, and in the not so distant future, whether it's the water company or our buildings, like I said. And I felt like this year, from the next 15 years, we're going to be taking $350,000 or whatever cost it turns out to be out of our operating budget. Now, I know that wasn't enough to buy the fire engine this year, but maybe next year is it going to be 2 police cars or an ambulance? And we're taking, and then we're going to be doing, we talked about the fire situation, and we may be taking out a bond next year for multiple engines, maybe some other things to do with the fire department. So regardless of how we sort of decide to put this in the budget, whether, or excluded, non-excluded debt, whatever, it still is costing the taxpayers money. And I guess the bigger question is this a practical use of the money that we have when we have so many demands ahead of us? And is this the real need, or is it just the fields and the drainage, and that maybe a stadium or whatever you want to call it can come later? And I guess that's when I take the step back and look at the financial picture, I really wonder if this is the right thing to do.
Yep. I agree with you, Lizzie, that there are a number of capital, infrastructure things that have been put on hold. Mm-hmm. And to me, this is one of those projects. I mean, it's been talked about for a really long time, and it's not going to get better on its own. And as I look at this, I think I agree with you that we need to address the drainage. We need to fix that. I don't see how in good conscience we can't replace the bleachers. I don't think they're even compliant. I think there are ADA issues, and I think we have a Title IX report that also says that some of what we have to do is required. And I think as you maybe look at some of the different pieces, I think one thing that impressed me in some of the meetings was that something as simple as a scoreboard, which you might tend to think, gosh, do you need all those scoreboards? Do you need as big a scoreboard? Do you need as fancy a scoreboard? I can't speak to every feature, but it was interesting to me how on several occasions there were interdependencies. For example, on the Title IX, and Margaret's saying, if we're going to set up a field for the boys and it's got this on it, we've got to have one that's the same. So I guess I developed an appreciation for the fact that many of the aspects of this project are very interrelated, and as you start this project, it's kind of hard to pull some things apart. But let's remember that this infrastructure project was put on hold when the town, when things got tight.
Right.
And it's just like some of our other assets, it's not going to improve if we leave it alone. And I guess I look at our finances, and I think every time we make a decision, we look at the revenue that's coming in, and we make decisions about expenses. I'm not really sure that we can say this particular project means that we can't do this in capital or we can't do this over here. I think we collectively make decisions for the community. And I would hate to view this project as saying this is preventing us from doing something, because I think our process is a little more holistic than that.
Right, but I'm not saying that. I think what I'm saying is that when Tom Hoffman got up the other night, he said, we need a master plan for the fields. We don't even have a master plan for the fields, and I feel like this is knee-jerk reaction. Oh, we want this, we finally have money coming in. I think we should step back and we should have a master plan for the fields. We need more fields. There is no doubt about that. And one multi-purpose field isn't going to answer everything for the schools and for the youth sports. We need, and maybe what we need to do is take a more methodical approach to it and a stepwise go back, get a master plan, just like we did with the schools, and figure out where our priorities are and what we need to do. And we have not done that yet. And instead, we're just going bulldozing right ahead and doing this. And I think it's a real problem. We don't have a master plan on this, and we have a major problem not having enough fields for all the kids who are playing sports nowadays. And I think maybe some of the money might be better invested in buying land with a long-term plan to build maybe a big stadium in the industrial park where you can have some night games but still do turf fields, multi-purpose fields on the high school like Dover Sherburne did for half the price. They put in they put in 3 multi-turf fields and a little small stadium for about $2.2 million. And I think that we need to do that. And I think, but you also have to realize we have more senior citizens than we do kids in this town now. We're spending over 50% of the budget directly on the schools and some associated costs, and we need to have emergency vehicles for our seniors, for our elderly, when they have real medical issues.
Okay, I'm going to move to Mike.
Okay.
Now.
I mean, everything you say, Lizzie, is true, that there's a lot of different priorities that need to be met. This field, and I couldn't agree with you more, there aren't nearly as many fields in this town as there should be, but to all of a sudden stop this one dead in its track isn't going to help that. It's only going to make that problem worse. And we all know this high school facility, which is part of our high school, that has purposes. We have to, there's severe deficiencies with it right now that need to be addressed, and we have an opportunity to kind of solve some of those problems. A turf field allows you, I mean, we've heard the math on it. You get 2, maybe 3 times as much usage as a grass. So you're de facto getting 2, if not 3 fields right there with this project. I don't think this has been thrown on people. We know this has been a need for a very long time. We set up a committee a year and a half ago to study this issue, and the amount of vetting and hoops that this has gone through to get to this point has been substantial. And I think to stop it dead in its tracks is definitely not going to help the problem. And I don't think in the long run it's going to be financially advantageous to us either. You know, we are here. We know the field needs to be fixed. We know there are severe drainage problems. And we're going to have to spend money no matter what. And then to put a turf field on top of that, which then allows us to get more units of usage for the amount of money we're spending, mathematically, to me, I agree. We should have a master study for the fields, but in light of all the other priorities that we have, to me it makes more sense. Move forward, finish this one, get the bang for the buck, get the multiplicity of the turf fields, then yes, step back, look at the other priorities, and you know, a master fields plan I think would have to come after the fire stations and after the fire trucks. But for right now, given the amount of work, I don't think this is sudden. I don't think this is being thrown on people. There's been a tremendous amount of work done, and I think that with the turf, the numbers have been demonstrated that that's the way to go, and we should move forward, not backwards.
Okay, so what I'd like to do now is just direct us a little bit to look at the BB article, because I think we've spent some time kind of parsing through Y and Z, and I'll come back to AA. I just think BB sort of is more responsive to where we all are now, and I don't want to leave out kind of particular focus on that article.
Can I just want to ask one question before you leave Y about the drainage? My understanding is that there have been a few people who have talked to Bill Seymour, and we are increasing the pipe, the pipe underneath Union Street to a 30-inch from a 24-inch, but that there's still a problem with the pitch of the pipe, and that it really won't, the drainage really won't be totally repaired unless we change the pitch of that pipe
but that will cost us tens of thousands of dollars more, and that the school committee had opted not to do that, rather just put the larger pipe in. And my question is if we're working about the drainage, do we want to really fix this drainage problem and do it right and spend the extra money on that maybe than rather on something else and do it right?
I thought, and I'm going to ask Carol to speak to it, I thought there was some issue with respect to other utilities work and paving that was preventing some of this, but I can...
Right, so they have the option to spend
Right,
more.
so we worked very closely with Roger Fernandez on the drainage issue and the pipe issue crossing Union Street. And Roger, John Chessier, the consultant to the town, and Gail developed a plan that it mitigates the drainage issue. There are, I think it's sewer lines that are running underneath.
A whole lot of utilities.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of utilities, and
but my understanding is if we get a real big rain, that we still may have flooding, whereas if we spent more money, is that right?
No, I don't.
Go ahead, Tom.
I think you're looking at one aspect of the total system. Yes, the pitch is not going to be corrected under the existing system. But if you combine all the other things, such as the infrastructure, the substructure of the turf field, a better infiltration of the baseball fields, that takes some of the water away and also decreases the flow that's going through and increase the pipe that's going under Union Street. The system is not supposed to create the issues of the surge, which is the issue with the slope. And I take a great deal of comfort in the fact that the design that is being recommended by Gail went through a lot of scrutiny by our peer review guy. And he spent an inordinate amount of time making sure that it's going to work.
Right, my understanding it's an improvement, but that if you really want to fix it, you got to fix the pitch of that drain.
If that was the case, he would not have approved this.
Yeah, it went through Concom unanimously. So, I mean, they would not have approved it unanimously if it wasn't going to fix the issue.
Yeah, if Concom, and I was not at the last meeting, but if Concom had an issue about what you're suggesting, they would have put a condition upon the design that would have taken care of that slope. They feel that all of the rest of the system, which is the substructure of the turf, the pipes that are being introduced, the infiltration that will be advantage with the reconstruction of the baseball field, that leaving the slope as it is not going to be a concern.
Okay. That was a great question.
Okay.
Just a quick question relating to the cost as it relates to Title IX. I hear what you said, Mary, and I've heard the discussion about Title IX, which is a great title. I've read through it. I understand what it was designed for, what it does. But it also has a double edge to it. Schools have found out that having Title IX also comes with a great cost. And they've made cuts because of that cost of having Title IX. Of having to have Title IX, they've had to make some sacrifices. And sometimes I keep, well, I should say that, all I hear is Title IX, we have to do this because of Title IX. At some point, and again, it comes to the cost, when do we say we just can't do it? You know, perfect example, Boston University got rid of its football team because of Title IX. Schools in the Midwest where wrestling is huge got rid of the wrestling program only because they had to apply Title IX. And at some point, I think we have to look at Title IX and say, what can we do, what can we afford? We can't do everything. You know, I know Title IX says we have to do this. At some point, you have to say, what's the cost involved? Is it becoming too costly to the town, to the individual taxpayer, as well as the town itself?
And so part of what that might look like, Jim, is, because I was thinking about that too, right? Part of what that might look like is we fix the drainage, we take down the bleachers, we put up no bleachers. We have, I guess, no bathrooms.
No scoreboard.
We have no scoreboard and we have no clock.
No, I'm not.
No. Or we have to come up with either a multi-surface playing field that offers all that stuff in one location, or we come up with more than one grass surface that offers those same amenities.
I'm saying you have to look at the entire athletic program as well as facilities and start saying, okay, what can I afford to do? What can I not afford to do? I just think that has to be considered. I know we want everything we can possibly get. It can't always happen.
Right, no, and I mean, you know, that's part of what the school committee goes through in any number of ways, and other department heads have to go through in any number of ways. But I guess my response to you is I was trying to think about it in the context of this particular request, and, you know, you can't afford a playing experience to one gender without affording that same playing experience to other gender. So we either do away with all of it, which, you know, then we don't vote for Y at all, which is, and if we, you know, folks don't want to spend money on that, then we don't vote for Y at all. And then we're left with, we still need to comply with Title IX. We're left with having to come up with a plan to do that. But anyway, I think you're right. Title IX is federal legislation that forces schools, among others, to confront gender equity issues. And
I remember in a study of the schools in Massachusetts, the school districts of high schools, aside from 2 other schools, Hingham has the most number of athletic teams. I think it's around 36. Yet there are schools that perform better academically and maybe athletically with less sports teams. I mean, they've made a decision that they can only go so far with their dollars. I think it would be a good thing for the town to look at the individual taxpayer in terms of spending money for things as well as the entire forest. Again, there are people in this town, as Lizzie has said, that live on meager amounts, whether it be fixed income, whether it be whatever the financial reasons, what has occurred in the last few years. I think that has to be taken into consideration when you start throwing around the price tag or something, and I know they vetted out as best they could. I'm just saying, you have a large budget, you have a larger budget in the next year, and in 2015, when the school comes on, the junior high school, an even larger potential budget.
I do want to move to BB.
Understood. That's all I'm saying.
Appreciate it. Thank you. So, so BB, you know, I think that's you, right? Want to say a few words?
Well, again, the comment went out last night. I think everybody on the committee had a chance to review it. I think petitioners put forth the article in good faith, did a lot of hard work to try and put together something that would be responsive to the critical needs of the drainage, the gender equity issues, replacing the aging bleachers, et cetera. But I think, as we discussed it, there were very real concerns about how good are the numbers that the petitioners were using. I know they were somewhat limited in their access to information and didn't have an appropriation to fund a study, et cetera, so there was a lot of sort of grassroots effort to try and come up with the numbers, but at the end of the day, I think we could all at least get the sense that they're not as firm as the school committee's numbers are. And frankly, in my opinion, I think other than the lights, which I think this can be addressed in the discussion on Article AA, there really isn't that big a difference between BB and Y, at least not enough, in my mind, for us to consider BB beyond. We've looked at it, we've heard it thus far, but frankly, there's just not that big a difference between BB and Y, and it's not a persuasive enough argument that there would be a real savings in cost, or that you would be able to satisfy particularly with regard to the bleachers, you'd be able to satisfy the requirements there and still meet the petitioner's objectives of protecting the streetscape and the view from Union Street and the historic nature of the surrounding neighborhoods.
Are there questions in particular for Greg with respect to BB or yes, Laura?
I would like to, I don't see it that way. Because I see what they're doing is they're pretty much taking the work that has been done with their tax dollars and they're subtracting, generally speaking. So you would think that if the numbers were presented by the school committee are accurate, that, and they're taking or lessening features, that you could feel pretty confident that the numbers are not going to be more anyway. Right?
And I think that if you look at the fact that they were not able to really get access, they were not allowed to speak to Gale Associates, that they actually received, they used what they thought were public documents on the drawings, and they received a letter from Gale Associates through the school lawyers saying that they basically were threatened, saying you shouldn't be using our drawings. And they tried to do the best they could with what they have. They basically are working at a $275,000 disadvantage because the school committee got given that money and they've been given no money. And I think that they might be able to produce a much less expensive option for the town if we allowed them. And I think that there's been so much sort of animosity and difficulty. You know, they've tried to compromise. The neighbors I know said that they were willing to let the lights and the turf and everything be there as long as it was just for school things, and the school committee said no, they wanted more than just school activities, which I think is going beyond what they are supposed to do as school committee members. But they went and did that, and they were unwilling to compromise, and so the neighbors felt they had to come up with some kind of alternative, and then they were not allowed to access anything. And they're working at a major disadvantage, and I think that the price actually may be significantly less if we were allowed them to have access.
So just to clarify the Gale Associates issue that you brought up, Lizzie, thank you. That letter actually came from Gale Associates, not from the school committee's lawyers. And Mr. Burnham was advised that the documents were in fact public documents, and so the side-by-side comparison I think you see is based at least in part on the estimates provided by Gale Associates. So I think you're right. Town meeting in 2011 approved an appropriation to the school committee, and so I think there's some notion, I think Mary made a comment about that the last time around, there'd be some notion that the school committee really needs to use those funds that were appropriated to the school committee, so to sort of have other folks come in and be able to talk to the engineer that we told the school committee to hire. I'm not sure, if you looked at it sort of in another circumstance, I'm not sure we'd want that to happen. We want accountability for that appropriation. I completely agree with you that it puts people at a disadvantage. The flip side of that, though, and the thing that was important to me and something that I kept in touch with Tom Piles on since last year was the public process. Now, you get to the end of the day and maybe you don't all agree on what the answer was, but I think there were 25 plus meetings or so, plus school committee meetings, plus Concom meetings, plus planning board meetings. So the public part of the process was really important for me, sort of from a background to make sure it was occurring. And then, just the other notion, which again, I know probably enough about to get myself into trouble, is just, the dictates of Chapter 71 of the Massachusetts General Laws that essentially tell the school committee, listen, you manage your facilities, but you have to manage your facilities in the best interest of the town. And so, again, I don't think we'd be very happy if on Friday afternoons all the schools were locked up and, the town that paid for this stuff doesn't have access to it. So I think they are mandated by state law, and I think it would be our expectation, frankly, for putting all this money into this, that we come up with some reasonable usage. And I think, again, usage policy has gone through several iterations. Not everybody's happy, and maybe that's a good thing, right? Because if any one stakeholder was happy, maybe that means the usage policy tips in a particular direction. So, I hear what you're saying with respect to this. I just wanted to clarify a couple of those points.
Laura, if I could respond to Laura's comment. So I don't necessarily disagree with what you said, but I think in my mind the basis of the alternative petition article is a smaller footprint for the stadium, the seating, and smaller concession building. But I don't think that, based on the discussions we've had and the information we've been provided, that those are feasible solutions to the problem. I don't think that we could do what we've committed to do with the smaller infrastructure. And for example, it might be a small point, but I think the petitioners had contemplated bleachers would all be on the same side of the field, and that doesn't seem to be a workable solution.
But then I think Ben said he could put one of the
Right.
the portable ones on the other
And the idea of
side.
using the
So
portable
that's not,
bleachers. I mean,
yeah.
but those are things, but the costs around that aren't hard. We don't know what those costs are. There hasn't been enough.
I think didn't they give us?
There's
a sheet?
estimates, but I don't.
I think they estimated $34,000 right there.
Correct.
I mean.
Well, we have
if you
estimates for the schools,
Well,
too.
and
We
some of the
don't-
other estimates, though, are also just pro rata reductions of what, and I don't think it's necessarily fair to say, because something's going to be 80% the size of something, it's going to cost 80% of the cost. So that's where I have a problem with some of the costs. And I think I acknowledge that they didn't have the advantage that the school committee had of the town appropriation to fund it, and I think they deserve a lot of credit for the effort that they put forth. But at the end of the day, in my opinion, I don't think they put forth a viable project.
But if you think they're projects, what you would want, but they haven't been given the opportunity, how do you handle that then?
Well, I'm not sure. It isn't necessarily what I would want either. I mean, right, other people may have a different view of that, certainly.
Mary?
Respect that.
I think for me, as you look at the cost differential, and I'm working off numbers from last week, so those might have changed, but $4.7 million versus $4 million, and I think we can all agree at the end of this that no matter how it turns out, we're not going to try this again for another 50 years. And, to me, as I was looking at the bleachers, one thing struck me, and I know there's been a lot of conversation about seating, and I really questioned whether the Article BB seating was enough. And, specifically thinking about big events where, like a graduation or a homecoming, where even the 1,000 home seats plus a 360 portable was going to be enough. And in fact, if you look at the price differential of $300,000 between the two seating, and you say, gee, over 30 years, how much is that? It's about $10,000 a year. I bet you that if we had those smaller bleachers, that 2 or 3 times a year, the school committee would need to go out and rent even more bleachers because 1360 is not enough. And I think that $10,000 per year we're saving over 30 years, which is $6,400 over 50 years, would get eaten up in rental of additional bleachers, the cost to move them around, the sort of tearing up of things as they were moved. So as I started looking at the economics of it, particularly over a 30 or a 50-year life, the significance in the dollars didn't seem to be as much. And the potential savings from Article BB didn't seem as significant.
Mary, if the government study committee gets involved in this, we could be seeing it every year.
Jim.
My other issue with BV was the lack of the
Hang on,
light.
Jim, can you find a microphone?
Oh,
sorry.
My name is James Taylor, so people know. B. James? What do I go by Jim? My other issue, and I applaud the proponents' effort here. I think they've done a great job in giving us a lot to discuss. My biggest issue with their article was the lack of lights. I think you get a tremendous amount of utility from the fields with the extended playing time that lights provide to you. And when you look at the cost differential, if we're spending $4 million on fields, then I believe that they should be utilized to their utmost. And I believe the lack of lights to me was the biggest determining factor of why I'm not supportive of their article.
Any other questions with respect to BB?
I'd like to just finally say that I looked at Margaret Connity's note, which I have too many papers here, so I don't. I have a different perspective. I understand. Let's see if I can find it. Where is it? I understand the comments about the lights. But I will say that I know that 2 people on the planning board voted against the user policy because they didn't think it was the right place for lights. And I think that, where's her letter? Hold on just a second. Let me see if I can find it here. She sent a very good letter today, thank you. But I want to quote to you something that I thought, I do feel differently about than she does. And this was, she made a lot of good points today, and I applaud her for this letter. But what it came out was on, she said, what about open space? I think it's very important to remember these fields exist solely to be athletic fields. That is their only purpose. They are not a meadow, they are not a pasture, they are not a garden. They are athletic fields. It is our responsibility as a town to make sure that these fields are safe in the absolute best shape they can be. I feel differently about that. I think this is one of the most beautiful open spaces we have in this town. And it is used as athletic fields, but it's also used as a lot of other things for people. And I think that to make these fields and then fence them all in is a real loss for our town. I think this open space is one of the things that gives, as I've said this before, Hingham desirability. And it makes it, Hingham, different than other towns. I mean, there are plenty of towns in the South Shore. You go and you see them. I pass by one of them every day, and all the fields are all fenced in, and they're, you know, prim and proper, but they've lost that open space. And that's the kind of thing that differentiates Hingham from other towns. People come and they drive through this town and they say, wow, what a beautiful town. And as I've told you, a lot of realtors have told me they bring them down Glad Tidings Plain and then down Free Street and Union Street, and they see the open fields. And I think that these open fields mean a lot to people other than just high school athletes. I spent my years growing up on these fields. I played as an athlete for years. Then I ran on these fields when I had knees that still worked. I walk on these fields. There are people out there flying kites with their grandchildren, and a lot of senior citizens come out because it's the only accessible open space that you have. And okay, I think
can I just ask Carol then, it looks like you've got some drawings. Can you maybe, and I'll help you, can we maybe move these around in front so we can sort of take a look? You know, because I think part of it is we're only, of the 26 acres, right, we're only talking about a section of the 26 acres.
Right, but I'd like to pass this around too, to show you the open space and how little open space there is other than maybe the South Shore Country Club, and how that accessibility for people other than just athletes.
And I apologize to the audience. I'll be happy to flip them around in a minute, but you know, for us, I think it's important to get a sense, because I guess, you know, my view of this, Lizzie, is a little bit different than it being all fenced in, because I think like where the boys lacrosse and boys soccer play, that's going to be all open space. There is going to be some additional parking, but frankly, I think that additional parking is crucial to the neighborhood, crucial to the neighborhood.
But my understanding is this is going to be all fenced in around here.
Yeah, but it's not, it doesn't abut right up to Union Street. You're going to have all that, you're going to have that same vista across. So like,
well, there was a picture we saw in one of our diagrams when you were at the street level. There was a fence going right along by the.
We value engineered those fences out.
By the. So you got rid of them.
Yeah.
So.
Is that another word for cut?
I learned a lot of new words.
But so I hear you, but I do think that at least this view that I'm seeing affords a lot of open space on the lacrosse field side, and it affords open space that goes from Union Street into where the bleachers and the walkway would be. So I do think you still have, at least from Union Street, a pretty nice view across across the fields. But and we'll move these in just a second.
I mean, the Historic Commission, District Commission, did vote unanimously against this project because they didn't feel it was the right place for this kind of a field. I'm just saying that, and that there are people who value that field as an open space.
Right, and so I think you're concerned that there's reduction of open space.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted a visual so that folks understood what the project is, and they can make a judgment on that. And with respect to the Historic Districts Commission, was it the Districts Commission?
Yeah.
You know, I think we heard some discussion last time that, you know, and if I were the Historic Districts Commission, I would want to be taking positions on projects around town where I thought there was some historical component to it, right? But we did hear, and I think everybody acknowledged, that the high school itself is on the edge of the district. You know, certainly the streetscape and all that is influenced by what occurs on the edge of the district, but just to be clear, right, the high school itself is not in the district.
No, I understand that, but I think it would have been nice to have done the balloon test that Suki Berry suggested, where you could see, if you put 80-foot lights in there, what it would look like as you drove down Main Street through the historic district.
Okay. Any other questions? I think we're actually still on BB, although I've lost track, I must confess. Now would be good. So here, maybe we'll. Do you want to? I don't want to block the audience.
If it's visually so much, but, well, you can get up if you'd like. But I was trying to think, because I think maybe to the point of viewscape and all that stuff. So it seems to me that in terms of preserving the view, if that's important to you, the school committee's proposed project has a lot of nice landscaping to try and mitigate the impacts, the visual impacts of the project, and I think that's important to know. But it does seem to me that your eye will be stopped at a point where, at this point, you would look further beyond, and I think that the petitioner's project tries to minimize some of the hardscape, I think you'd call it, so that you could maintain that view better. So, I mean, I think it's important to sort of know what the differences are.
We're not used to these microphones, sorry.
Okay.
So that's the main, I mean, I think that's the main difference, really, is it reduces the size of the structures to minimize the impact on the overall, and it has two effects. It minimizes the visual impact, but then functionally, it minimizes the amount of capacity unless you, you know, for big events, unless you added portable bleachers or something like that.
Right.
And I guess it would minimize the parking issue too. So.
Parking is the same on Hingham.
You're right.
I believe.
Yeah, no, the plan is to, you're right, to be the same.
Any other questions with the view? Because I'd like to get this out of the way of the audience if we're done. I just wanted to be able to look at it. Beth, do you?
Madam Chair, because we put the thing, do you make a statement?
Quickly.
As far as
Can you come to the microphone, Beth? Yeah, do you mind moving it? Yeah. Are we done? Are we done with this part, guys? Yeah? All right, thank you. Sue?
Since you're talking about, Beth Rockoff, 36 Pleasant Street, since you're talking about the visual impact on the neighborhood and the historic character, one of the main reasons for putting it forward, as I stated before, and I won't use the quote again, which was still supported by a 2-to-3 vote on the planning board, was how the lights will impact the neighborhood. And I think this photo over here, rather than those photos, states more to the fact the true visual impact of an 80-foot light tower will be above the tree line of the neighborhood. And so right now, Pleasant Street, although the fields are not in the historic district, Pleasant Street is in the historic district. The first 20 feet were included on the Pleasant Street Hingham Center District. And that streetscape will be visible from not only Pleasant Street, which is in the district, and used to be the main entrance of the high school until it was moved around to Union Street, but also for all of the historic districts that are around the area. And so I think, in fairness to those who have been the forefathers of our area and have worked very hard to preserve the character of the town, it will be definitely impacted by those towers.
Oh, thank you. And that's good too. That's a good view, I think, of the light towers, and we may want that back up when we move to AA. Not that you have to hold it, Linda, but any other comments with respect to BB?
Well, I guess I would just add, I mean, I respect Beth's opinion, but I think that that's best addressed in AA and not in BB. If lights are your concern, I think we should deal with it in AA.
Okay. Okay. So, unless anybody has any sort of final questions with respect to Y, Z, or BB, I'd like to sort of move off that and on to the exciting topic of lights. Okay?
I ask a couple questions, like on Tom's comments, there were some things that I thought could be changed or added to or whatever. Is that something I should just wait till later to do?
Yeah,
You can bring it on anytime.
Okay, I just didn't know if that was what we're supposed to do here or.
No, why don't you do it offline?
Okay.
Just contact
And
me.
also, did we ever get a letter from Bruce Rebufo?
Oh, that's a good point. So we did get, as you all know, and I should have mentioned this at the outset, I apologize. Thank you for bringing that up. We did get a letter in support of the school committee's project from Laura Burns, and we did get a similar letter from Irma Lauder. I haven't gotten, I've not received anything yet from Bruce Rebufo. So as soon as I do, I will send that around, but I haven't gotten anything from him. So good question. We didn't know. Okay. Okay, so now we turn to AA, which is Tom Piles. Would you like to offer any remarks about the light article? No?
No, I think the comments kind of do everything I wanted to do. You know, there's a lot of emotion around this issue. It is something that the school committee feels strongly will improve the players' experience through more practices and more games, that will have more usage, that will have more revenues that will be brought in to do things like Jim is asking, better maintenance of the fields, and that it's a much better community participation. We heard from the petitioners on BB that lights are a real issue for them. Lights obviously bring night activity, which creates neighborhood nuisances, and lights are visually offensive and create issues with open space. So there is a huge variety of emotions that go from one side to the other, and I'm sure on this committee there are issues and people have particular interest in this, and I'd love to hear them.
Lucy.
I mentioned this to Tom earlier today, but I better grab this thing. My feeling is that this article doesn't require funding, so it doesn't require bonding, it doesn't require approval because there's no zoning change. It's purely a sentiment of the voters. How do you feel about this? And I'm wondering if we should put something in the comments that explains what Dover does to eliminate the need to have a zoning change. I don't know how many voters understand that, but there is nothing they can vote on here except up or down, do I like or not like.
Which brings up the next question in terms of if this article were to be turned down, what are the options at that point? Can the lights still be put up under Dover?
I think that the school committee, as a separately elected body, has statutory authority over its facilities. I think that I think it would be a legal matter to sort out. I think there's a viewpoint that the school committee would have the authority to move forward essentially with or without asking town meeting this question. I think there are other lawyers on the one hand, on the other hand, that would suggest that that authority should be more constrained or is more constrained. But I think that there's at least some sentiment that the school committee is a separately elected and statutory body would have the authority to move forward regardless, so long as the money for the lights were privately funded.
I'll just say, as I said before on Article Y, I think we need to be very careful in terms of the way we word the comments so that that's clear.
You would have that instituted in the comment section?
I think in some fashion.
Yeah. I'd like to make a comment about the private-public partnership. I think, I've said this before, but I think when people give money with strings attached, for example, saying this is for the lights only and only if this project goes through, I feel like this is a form of lobbying, and it's not donating without strings attached. And I think it comes as a political mechanism where the will of the people becomes secondary, that no longer do you need the 2/3 vote or whatever, which we don't really need because of the Dover anyhow. But I think that this sets a precedent for lobbying in our public school system, and I think that's a problem. And I think we should think long and hard about that. This is lobbying because of how it comes with strings attached. And I think that's a real serious consideration.
I'm not sure lobbying is maybe the right term. I do think that when we involve, lobbying is to advance a legislative cause or to advance a candidate. You know,
Well,
this is
sort of a legislative cause.
Well, I guess my point is that you're absolutely right. When we as a town decide that we are going to invite private partners in, that whole notion of a partner means that they're going to have some say or potentially want some say, and you're absolutely right about that.
I've thought about this a little bit too, because I do feel that the way it's gone down, I was looking at, for example, the Heritage Museum as an example of another way that this could have been done that would remove some of the influence that the money has over the process, because it is influencing the process. And the decision of the way it was funded as well as influencing the process. But, I think it would have been better if there was a fully developed project before us with a private fundraising objective and a public ask. And that would have sort of, then the public could say, all right, we're willing to do this, and you're willing to do that, and the expectations are clear, and it doesn't appear that perhaps, a body that's the original proponents are taking on a bigger project because some funders have an interest in a certain development of the project. And I think that going forward, that would be a model where the public-private partnership might work. I think this one is flawed.
I think it's kind of hard to compare this to the Heritage Museum, because if we had broken the Heritage Museum down into component parts, right, and we looked at it and we thought there were things going on there that we didn't want to pay for. Like, let's say the Heritage Museum let's say the Heritage Museum couldn't park behind the bank. This is Mr. Hersey's question. Where are you going to put all these cars, right? And so the Heritage Museum says, I want to build this Heritage Museum, and in the back, off the streetscape, I want to build a parking garage, and I want you to fund it. And we say, we believe in the goals of the Heritage Museum, we don't believe in the parking garage. So they come back and say to us, okay, we'll take your money and we'll do X with it, and we'll privately fundraise for this aspect of the project. So for the Heritage Museum, we didn't ask the Heritage Museum to come to us and break down the project. And frankly, I can't imagine there are any aspects of the Heritage Museum project that we would find troubling. But this particular warrant article structure, again, if you make a leap with me, is attempting to respond to what we asked them to do. And so to your point though, right, which I think is a good one, if the project is really in the minds of the school committee, Y plus Z plus AA, then all monies, all privately fundraised monies would go toward defraying the cost of the project. But that's not how we've asked them to structure it.
Well, I think that we're sort of working our way through the public-private part, but I do think that having certain funding attached to certain parts of it certainly appears to influence the project.
Well,
and the way the project is.
I can only say that, I do, in a job that I get paid for occasionally, provide fundraising counsel, right? People, this is your point, right? When people want to fund what they want to fund, and we can't dictate that. So
I understand that. I think it's more, is there a place for that in our public school system? I find that a real problem.
I don't see why necessarily not. I mean, Laura's right in what she said, but on the other hand, it's transparent. If somebody's willing to pay for, in other words, this is a way of going to town meeting and saying, look, if you like the lights, but you choke on the price tag, we'll make that part of it easy for you. I think it's as simple as that, so, I don't know. I'm not all that troubled by it as a matter of precedent.
Except that if we had to borrow for lights, it would be 2/3. It changes the voting. It has changed.
Yeah, that's
on the
true.
political
That's true.
process.
Yep,
If you
yep,
have
yep.
certain
Yep.
protections
Why do you
built
say-
into the process.
Yep.
Why do you say it's not true, Dennis?
Well, because you are going through the town meeting process, if that is by your choice. I think you're probably going to say by Dover you don't have to, but, yeah.
I think there's a precedent already for the public-private partnership in the school system. I mean, think about all the fundraising that goes on today, whether it's Hingham Educational Foundation that supports, endeavors of the school that otherwise wouldn't be funded. I'm thinking about all the smart boards that have been bought throughout this town with private donations. So to stop that, because, potentially there's a perception issue, I think you're going to be taking away a large potential.
And I'm not suggesting you stop it. I'm just saying that in a fully defined project with fully defined private and public funding expectations, you could perhaps minimize the appearance of.
It makes the political process different. I mean, we give to the Hingham Education Foundation, but I don't say I only want smart boards or I only want this. I give without strings attached. I think it makes a difference when you have strings attached that affect the political process. That's when I think it is lobbying.
Just a quick, if we vote for these lights, the town votes for these lights, do we then set the precedence that 80-foot poles are then allowed in any part of the town?
No.
So strictly for the high
Just in
schools?
schools, right?
Strictly.
If it's an educational or religious facility, they might have the same.
So this is
ability
strictly
to-
because of the Dover amendment?
Yes. If they could, a petitioner could apply for 80-foot poles, but they have to go through a zoning.
No, I understand. I just
process.
thought because of this, just sets the precedent, even though it's through the Dover amendment, sets the precedent, changes the zoning law for the town.
No.
It'll be 80-foot lights.
No.
Does set a precedent.
Understood.
Dick, did you have a comment? Any other comments over there? Comments over here on lights?
I just have a personal, thought about lights, and this is no surprise to anybody, because I brought it up early on in the process and then let it go, because I just wanted to, as I said at the time, sensitize people. But I do think that lights, this is a very personal impression, but I do believe you can have too much of a good thing, and I think sports are fabulous. But I also think that our family life, especially for our young children, is very important, and I view this as sort of a drift for kids into evening activities. They're already, the high school age is already competing with a whole lot of other activities in the evening anyway, but especially for the youth sports that have requested use of this, I feel that it opens the door to younger kids playing later in the evening, and that, I think is not the best thing for our younger kids.
Can I just follow up on that? I understand where you're going, Laura. But there's also another way to look at it, which is that we have so few fields and so little space that things are constrained. And as a result, our sports teams and even many of our youth are playing at times that are not very convenient. And I think that's the case with fields and gymnasiums. And I think one could argue that by having more fields and having them available for more hours, that provides a little more flexibility in the overall scheduling. And that I think our coaches and our staff, typically you have parent volunteers who are coaches and things. So I would think that there would be a lot of sensitivity to not having, the 6-year-olds out there at 8 o'clock. But I guess what I'm thinking is maybe because the older kids can be out there at 8 o'clock, that frees up the field at 4:30 for the 6-year-olds. So it kind of could go either way.
But I think going back to my comment earlier that I think rather than build a big stadium, putting in something smaller, less expensive, having a master plan and using some of that money to buy more land is essential in the town's best interest.
I would just as a follow-up, because I think that's been mentioned a few times, and as the advisory liaison to the industrial park, I would just remind us that the industrial park and the purpose there is to promote commercial development that would generate property tax revenue for the town. And right now, we don't have water or sewer infrastructure, and we're kind of working on that, but I think it's it is still a couple years away. And setting aside whether, from an athletic standpoint, it's appropriate to have that activity down at the industrial park, let's also remember that every parcel that the town uses for its own use is a parcel that's not generating, revenue for us. And, while it is true that the town owns a parcel there, the parcel that the town owns is intended to be part of the infrastructure for the sewer. And so if that parcel is purposed for something else, the town would be obligated to go out and purchase yet another. So as we're talking about this, I think there's a tremendous economic impact in considering the industrial park in play that I think we would have to take very, very seriously, because it's not only potentially increased cost, but I think there could be a revenue impact as well.
But I look at South Shore Sports Complex and what they're building down on 53 in Hanover, that huge thing. There must be some kind of market for it if they're building it. It must be a profitable business. I'm just saying that is a possibility.
But there's a difference between Hingham improving its fields at the high school that are run by this, that are managed by the school committee, versus the town of Hingham saying, we're going to build the new Starland and we're going to operate it. I think that's kind of a different proposition. That I almost feel like we're kind of comparing two different things.
Maybe, but the demand is there, I think, and I think that that would be a more community-wide thing. But if you have a night game, whether it's the high school or a youth sport, people travel to it no matter where it is. I mean, you still need to fix the fields at the high school. They have to have practices. But as far as a big stadium, maybe I think it's a better place, and it keeps the desirability in Hingham Center.
Okay, so we've been talking about this since 7:30. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. Yeah, I shouldn't say that. We do have the treasurer collector, which if you missed it, I'd be happy to fill you in. So I'm wondering whether you're ready to vote, whether you have...
Sorry, I have a question, because we've heard a lot about the compromise, how this was a compromise. And I think that it's possible you can have a lot of meetings because you're entrenched in a position and not moving very much. And I have tried to sort of understand in my mind what the big compromise was that accommodated the neighborhood and those that want to preserve the character of the town. And from my understanding, the compromise is that instead of every night having sound, we have sound 2 weeknights, and maybe an hour less on Friday or Saturday night. It's open, the lights and the and so to me, I'm asking, what were we trying to avoid? What were we trying to do to accommodate the abutters and the neighbors and the character and this and that? And I'm not sure that limiting the PA was an effective compromise, because I also understand that it's actually the crowd noise is actually louder than the PA, and that will be happening whenever there's activity there. So I'd love you to explain to me how your perspective on the compromise.
There's been a lot of compromise. And I don't even know where to begin. We just got a bill from Gale Associates because they've been to 47 meetings with us. So I can't even, so if we go back to the very beginning, and ad hoc's recommendation to school committee, their recommendation included a usage policy, which I don't have in front of me because I wasn't prepared, because this is not under your purview, right? The usage policy is for us to decide. It was approved by planning board. Began with PA. We heard from the neighbors a lot that PA was an issue with them. Right. They didn't care about lights at that point, and they didn't care about synthetic. So the majority of the first group of meetings that ad hoc had focused on the use of PA. Then it turned to lights.
Well, so would it be helpful to say that if the sports community had its druthers And I think we do need to differentiate between the high school and the sports community, but I think in this point, their desires have converged.
No, not
Would
at
it
all.
be-
Not at
no?
all.
Okay.
And you know what? Because
That's
the
fair.
neighbors also said, to start with, and I don't want to make this tit for tat, we'll
Right.
allow the school committee the fields, we just don't want any youth sports on it. Which, so there again, they were fine with PA and they were fine with lights, as long as only we used it.
From school
And as
usage.
you all heard, that we have a responsibility under state law that we make our buildings and our fields available to the town as a whole.
Right.
Okay, so we took a step back and said, all right, I talked with every your youth sport president in the town, soccer, boys and girls lacrosse, Hingham youth football. There is no field hockey youth sport, and discuss what their needs and wants are. And we tried to put a usage policy together that would not meet everybody's needs, because by far we didn't. A lot of you know that dads coach these youth teams and they can't get home from Boston until 6 o'clock at night. And we don't have the fields open to handle both high school and then youth sports.
But you couldn't have done that anyway, right? So I guess what I'm saying is, if the full usage would be lights all day, lights every day and sound every day, because you couldn't really ask for more. At the end, what you've got is lights every day and sound every day but 2.
We have during, all right, so if you want to break it up into season, there's no lights and there's no PAs during the winter and summer months.
Right.
Right?
Right, yes.
So that's 28 weeks out of the year.
But there's still usage, right, in the summer?
There'll still be usage,
Right.
of course.
You just don't
as
need
long as
lights
they're
because,
lights.
you just don't, but you don't need lights because it's not dark. So conceivably, there could be usage.
There'll be usage
all the
until
time,
it's dark, right?
Right.
The lights. So the usage right now would be Monday through Friday. We're allowed 2 nights during the week with lights and PA. Depending on the sport, the PA is limited to announcement of the athletes for the national anthem.
Right.
And
But the crowd noise would still be.
Crowd noise is going to exist because games take place at the high school now.
Right, but
Right?
it wouldn't exist at night because games don't take place at night. So I guess what I'm trying to say is.
The games would be
and-
further away from Downing Street.
And are the lights going to be off and the field not in use on those nights when there aren't football games?
No, there'll be lights because there'll be practice.
No, lights are allowed
Right,
onto the field.
so basically, all lights and usage is permitted every night. It just doesn't have to be a game with PA.
Right, PA is limited.
PA is limited to 2 weeknights and limited to
3
those
Friday nights.
specified games.
Right. So we went out and looked at Natick and Needham were the two, so in Margaret's letter to you,
Right.
she asked 80 ADs across the state for the
Right.
usage policies. She got 2.
I know, you know what,
You know what?
I know,
Usage-
I
no,
know you
Laura,
guys
let me
went through a
explain
lot
this
of
to you
work.
because I've been through a lot.
Yes.
Okay? No, the usage policies for the 2 towns we got, Natick and Needham.
Yes.
Lights and PA available till 10. I mean, that's simple.
But are those places right in the middle of a neighborhood?
Yes.
Okay, so.
But I'm
so
not sure,
we're-
but what I'm just trying to get at is, again, what is in reality is happening. So the change to the neighbors is going to be every night, there can be use on those fields. I'm not saying games, I'm saying every night, there can be activity on those fields.
For 170 days a year, right?
So we had usage conversations at the ad hoc committee. We voted, they were unanimous. They were highly negotiated. And then there was a complete second bite at the apple at the planning committee, or planning board, excuse me, and they went completely back through it and went through it as well. And they approved it as well. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, I guess I
I'm
don't
not
want
sure.
to.
I'm not sure why at
just,
this
you know,
point
we're
we're
hearing
going.
because
we're going.
a
I'm not
lot
sure
of
why
the
at this point we're
advertising
going back.
talks
And
about
I'm Tim
compromise.
Schwer, 17 Crestfarm
Yeah.
Road.
So
Thanks.
one question I was wondering about, and I remember this early on, and I don't know where it ended up in the process, but wasn't there a second turf field floating around in this that you were talking to, or ad hoc maybe talked about, and then you were talking about maybe permitting, and now cost-wise that's off the table, right, at this point? Or what happened?
Cost-wise, well, as we went through the permitting process, realized that we have some drainage issues over there. So it wouldn't be appropriate. We also realized usage was an issue, traffic was an issue. A second turf field would bring more usage, higher traffic.
So sort of one step at a time.
It just made sense.
Okay. And Jim, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I had, you know, as I was going through my process of thinking about this evening, I pulled out a calendar and I pulled out the usage policy. Because I heard some very passionate folks talk about the usage policy and the impact. So maybe I can read you some stats I came up with, again, because I obviously have too much free time on my hands. So out of 365 days, 195 of them, there's no lights or PA. 130 days, you potentially have lights. The majority of those are up, the lights will turn off at 8:30. Only 29 evenings will you have lights up until 9, and then 3 nights up until 10. So only 3 nights will their lights be up till 10, 29 up until 9, and then the rest will shut off no later than 8:30. PA, there's 74 days allowed for PA. Only 10 of those 74 will you have PA after 7:30 at night. And only 3 of those evenings will you have PA after 8:30. And that's coincides with those 3 night football games in the fall where lights will stop at 10.
But what happened to the 4,400 days? You said 190 no lights, 130 lights.
So, let's see, 104 of those days, lights turn off by 8:30.
No, when you said 190 days, no lights.
No, 195 days, no lights. 130, well, yeah, that's no lights including,
Sundays at 5 p.m.?
Sundays at 5 p.m., exactly.
But the lights can still go on if it gets dark.
In the spring, there's no lights on Sunday,
Right.
correct? And in the fall, you potentially have lights on Sunday up until, I don't have it in front of me, up until 5, yeah. 5.
Mike, did you have a quick comment?
Just on the usage, I mean, I thank God for the televised meetings, because I got to watch a lot of the planning meetings at home on my couch.
People are saying that right now. Thank God for the television.
Yeah. And it seems to me that there was a tremendous amount of negotiation by both parties. And again, to Karen's earlier point, I think like any good deal, no side felt great walking away from it. And I'm not sure, and this is kind of a question, but I'm not sure if we should be sitting here debating the usage policy after we've received a recommendation from the planning board about the usage policy. It's been vetted, and as it stands before this committee, the usage policy has been vetted, negotiated, jumped through hoops, the planning board has signed off on it, and we are where we are.
Right.
I don't think we should be negotiating it here.
No, we're not negotiating it. I'm just
think
trying to understand the compromise from both perspectives, because clearly the citizens for the alternative or the balanced field project feel that the compromise isn't enough. And so I just wanted to hear from the school committee's perspective, again, what they gave. And so and I have my answer, so I appreciate it.
And you can, the sports community might want to speak, because they're not happy either.
We just want to hear from happy people, really. Okay, so, and that's, I think that was important. I think that's why we were allowing that discussion. We completely understand that the usage policy is not before us, but, okay. But Jim, that was really good work on the math.
Thank you. The school committee will receive my bill.
Okay, so now I ask you again. You think you're ready to vote?
Yes.
Mr. Piles, I look to you to make a motion.
Okay, may I make a statement first?
Yeah.
This is a very, very complex issue, and we have spent the school committee, the ad hoc committee, the planning board. There's been an inordinate amount of time of vetting and discussing these issues, and it's complex. And it's emotional, and people get emotional when there's complex issues and there's big questions to decide on. We have a wonderful asset in the town that is underutilized right now because it's broken and it needs to be fixed. I think that I'm very sympathetic to the fact that we're here to talk about costs, and to a certain extent, everybody along the way has been sticker shock by the amount of cost, but the costs are what the costs are. I think that there are people, and I'm sympathetic to people that would reduce the cost by reducing the scope of the project. I think I'm convinced by Margaret and others that the size of the bleachers, which is basically the scope, is what it is, and it's necessary to get there, not only because of the large events that happen, but maybe the large events and the seating that's required, we hear, are underestimated because we're talking about paid attendance rather than full attendance. I am also very sympathetic to the fact that introduction of this complex for either with lights or with the synthetic turf or with 80-foot poles and with fencings, to some extent is a neighborhood intrusion. However, the project takes care of business. Dot loves to hear me say this. We are taking care of business. We need the bleachers to be fixed. We need the drainage issues to be fixed. We need Title IX to be improved. We heard early on that parking was a much bigger issue. This is taking care of parking. Usage, there's always going to be an issue with that, but I think, I'm sorry to say it, I think a wonderful compromise has been worked out. I think in why the costs are indeed aligned with our expectations if you deem that the lights and the turf would be privately funded. It is amenities, it should be, and there is a true public partner, public-private collaboration. I think it allows for competitive equality and better player experience and more community participation. I think to a very large extent, the synthetic turf allows for better field flexibility and management, resting of fields, enabling more games to be played. And I think it's something that we need to take care of. So I would propose, are we going chronologically or?
Alphabetically.
Alphabetically. I'm not even sure how to do this, but I would recommend that the town borrow, and do we put the actual appropriation in the recommendation?
Yes.
That the town borrow $3,765,180 to complete the project, as stated in the article.
So,
one of the questions I would have from a recommendation standpoint is, do we literally say that it would be a synthetic turf that we are directing the school committee to construct?
I think, not to dodge the question, but I think ultimately the recommended motion will need to be approved by bond council. And so I think for our purposes, we are voting an appropriation of $3,765,180 for completion of the project as defined in Article Y, which contemplates the installation but not the cost of a turf carpet or turf surface, turf playing surface.
Is that number is subject to revision, right?
Yes.
I don't know.
You should.
Well, yeah, the actual figures. That's why I asked if we actually put these figures. Those figures are estimate figures.
It should be up to. So I guess I'll try to say it again. I think the recommended motion should be something along the lines of that the town raise, appropriate, borrow, transfer from available funds the sum of up to $3,765,180 to complete the project as described in Article Y, which contemplates a turf playing surface, a synthetic turf playing surface, but does not include the cost of that surface. Dick, you gotta help me, I'm drowning.
I'm gonna help you by seconding that one.
Okay.
When is the time for debate on that? Is it?
It was started at quarter.
No, I mean, and I've been largely quiet, and at the right time, I'm going to make an objection. I think there can be debate at some point before a motion's voted on. It's just this, to repeat what I said, I think what you've just said is not what the article says. It's what people, the way people want it to go, but it reads the last thing you said, which contemplates, and this is the first way you said it, which contemplates the installation but not the cost of a synthetic turf field, and that's not what the article says.
But in our recommendation, we can say anything we want to.
I realize that, but it doesn't say that. I know you can change the article, but I don't think we should, in light of the fact that town meeting should be having a choice on this. As a process issue, town meeting should be having a choice. It's come to pass that you all have learned an awful lot since October 24th, 2011, about why synthetic turf is better and, in your view, necessary. And I would support the turf. But I think the fair way to do it is to tell town meeting, you voted yourself a study a year and a half ago that was going to have a menu of options, and here's what they are, and we're here to tell you what we've learned in the last year and a half that makes one of them so far superior to the others that we ask you to vote for it for all of these reasons. And I think, personally, I think you'll look better. If there are people who are inclined to go against you anyway, because they just are inclined to go against you, I think you're going to hand them a bit of a reason, because you're going to be taking away the choice, and you're going to be taking away the choice that they're expecting to get when they show up. When they expect to open this warrant, they're going to be surprised at what's not in it. Last week around this table, there was a fair amount of surprise about this issue. Craig commented on it, I did, somebody else did, I forget who, and Mary, you had some, sort of diplomatic words to say to the proponents, but I think it was that, gee, this seems to be a bit of a game changer, and I think now we're part of changing the game, and I don't think we should.
Lucy.
Just listen to that comment. If we take the word artificial turf out of Y, and people vote for Y and don't vote for Z, the cost of a natural turf field is not in Y, according to what I've heard. It would cost an additional amount to build a natural grass field, and that's not built in. All we have built into Y is the preparation and drainage for the carpet, which then goes on as part of Z, right?
Right.
So I think there's got to be something here that said that people understand, what are they voting for? Am I voting for grass? Am I voting for turf? And if I'm voting for grass, that 3.7 might not be right.
That's right.
So I don't know. I agree with you, Dan, but I don't know how we get around doing this without numbers. We never did an estimate, a complete and thorough design estimate for natural grass, I don't think.
We do, but I felt from the beginning that we have to come up with the choices the town meeting is going to have first, and then put a cost on each of them. Rather than to take away choices because the numbers get hard to calculate. I'm a little...
And the flip side of that is the material choice is before town meeting, and in the moderator's view, these three articles respond to that. And what I have charted, what I charted at the beginning, was a way through them. If that's not, okay, Dan.
Okay, sorry.
If that's not the will of the committee, we can go another route. That's to me the way these things logically fit together, and I think preserve the material choice. If you or others feel like there should be a different choice, I'd encourage you to vote no on the way we have constructed Y, and we'll see what happens. I mean, if everybody votes no on Y, we may have to start all over again. But I think that if Y includes grass, it's a more expensive article than the number that I have quoted. Craig.
Sorry, go ahead.
A question to either the ad hoc committee or the school committee. I think I remember last week there was a statement made that if Article Z was not approved, that the private funds were available to cover the cost of the artificial turf?
Yeah, we are fundraising for that.
Are you at a point where you could make a commitment for that at this point? I thought I heard that last week.
Well,
That's why I'm
if
not-
Z is rejected, then they would have to.
But they would have to, but I thought I also heard last week that they said that they were ready and willing to.
No, right now, all I can commit to is $600,000. So that doesn't completely cover the cost of the installation of the turf carpet.
The lights and the turf.
Right.
It wouldn't cover both.
What are the two together?
$775,000.
Did you bring your checkbook?
No.
Karen,
I've
may I-
rounded a little bit, Carol, but that's about.
What I was just getting at, just to conclude that thought is, we've discussed a lot tonight in terms of, I agree with you, Dan, not answering the mail more or less from the town meeting warrant. But the other part of that is trying to minimize the cost to the taxpayer.
Right.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
I know.
And what I'm trying to get here is what can we craft that in our recommendation can at least go towards that in terms of we've looked at the whole picture, we've looked at a change, and I'm in agreement. I think the turf field makes sense in terms of what we're facing here. But on the other hand, if we can reduce the cost by accepting the private funds, that at least shows that we're looking out for the taxpayer to maximize. Because if we recommend to vote for it, suddenly the town's paying for that.
I'm not even so keen on that part of it, because I sort of think if we're gonna vote for this, if we're gonna vote for turf, then we should pay for the turf. It's kind of a town expense.
Well, you haven't bited the apple on Z on that.
You know, then you can start to look to have private people pay for everything you do.
Okay, you have a vote on Z on that one.
Yeah, I know that. Okay, so anyway, I guess,
I'm sorry.
all right, procedurally, I'm sorry, Karen, I think,
Okay, I think we got people that are anxious to take a vote.
Okay.
So if
I'd like to move to amend the pending motion. I think that's the procedure.
Okay.
Okay.
And how'd you like to amend it?
I'd like to amend it as follows, that we recommend to town meeting that the town raise and appropriate, borrow or transfer from available funds, a sum of money to be expended under the direction of the school committee to fund Phase 2 of the high school fields improvement project located at such and such, as is in the article.
And what's your appropriation?
Up to the number you used. You could,
It doesn't work. So you want them to build a grass field, right? Is that what you're saying?
no. I guess I want,
You want the cost to reflect the black grass field.
See, so now maybe you appreciate
Yeah.
my conundrum.
yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate.
I thought we couldn't alter the language of an article.
Yeah, so we can say, we can alter the recommended motion. So,
I just needed that for clarification.
so the thing I struggled with is just what you're struggling with, which is, if I want to give this grass choice,
Yep.
then I've got to come up with a number in Y that reflects grass. And I would argue that the number in Y that reflects grass is pretty darn close to the number of Y plus Z. It's pretty close to the appropriation to construct the turf field. Because you got to take out, if you do the math, right, you discount out the grass because you're
Yep.
not buying synthetic turf.
Right.
But then you've got to add back permitting and design. You've got to potentially
Drainage.
change the scope of the project, and you've got to add the drainage. And the reason you have to change the scope of the project is because, by definition, the grass field cannot accommodate a multi-purpose playing field. One grass field can't accommodate multiple sports in the same season. So I think financially, if you're not close, you're back pretty far to the cost of Y plus Z together. So one of the reasons I went with, Y minus the cost of Z was because of the taxpayer issue. I felt like that gave the town a greater ability to say, we don't want to pay for the cost of this particular amenity. It captured, to me, we were being more honest with town meeting to say, here's what turf's going to cost you. It's going to cost you, $455,000 more. And if you don't want to pay that, we'll find it somewhere else. Or, if we don't find it somewhere else, we've got this appropriation. We've got to figure out how we're going to solve the problems we have within this appropriation. But, so to me, when I was struggling through this, that was the more material choice, and I was trying to preserve the maximum right of town meeting to capture the cost and decide on the cost of the turf.
But But somebody could come back and say, town meeting said they were going to be these options and that they
You know,
didn't.
so listen, I spent, I'll tell, Mike Puzo, if you're watching,
Come on down.
I mean, I felt like Tim Scheuer and Carol Falvey with Mike Puzo this weekend, because I spent a ton of time on the phone with him, and I know that he talked to a lot of people about coming to some workable, sensible conclusions with respect to these articles. And so, you know, just like on the one hand, on the other hand, he reads that little paragraph that you and I are all focused on as saying that part of what we were directing the school committee and the ad hoc committee to do was to come back with something that worked. And part of what the moderator said was, it doesn't seem to make any sense to put something before the meeting that isn't going to solve the problem. So you know, back to the car analogy, right? He said you wouldn't ask town meeting to buy a two-wheeled car. So that can, you know, this evolution of hearing about this, of trying to understand the importance of the feature to not only the drainage part of the project, but the multi-purpose use of the project, sort of led me to the place where this particular design with one field and one set of bleachers and one set of scoreboards, I don't think it works without the turf. And so then I set to say, what's the most material decision I can put in the hands of town meeting? And I believe that the most material decision I can put in the hands of town meeting is whether they want to pay for the upgrade. So in some respects, they want to pay for the addition of the cost of the turf. That's where I was.
Okay, I understand that. Last week, Carol and Tim sat there and went through the slides and said, this would be the cost of no synthetic turf. This would be the cost of doing it with grass. This would be the cost of synthetic turf. And then the gentleman from Gale got up and said, and there's going to be some additional amount that goes into this, and I can't give you that number yet, but he roughed it out at about $200,000 to fix, to address the drainage problems that would continue to exist and would have to be engineered for if you had a grass field. So I guess the number I would use is the number that Carol and Tim gave for the cost of the grass field, and add in $200,000 for the drainage issues.
So is that your?
That's my number. Yeah.
Okay. So what is that number?
So this is
You get it,
2965
design fee too.
Yeah, you got it. So the $200,000 was just for drainage. So there'd be design money and permitting money that needs to be added back. Dennis. On this particular question, Dennis.
And just to address this, but I think what I'm hearing you saying is, if we do that, however, we would then have to have another game field, comparable game field, with bleachers and a scoreboard, because you can't play field hockey and the other sports if you're going to tear up that field playing football, which is not included in that number.
So that's why I'm saying that if you play this all out, you're pretty close to being back to the $454,000 that comes off Article Y if we go with the turf field. So maybe it's 300, maybe it's 350, maybe it's 250, but there's a material add back that you then take away from town meeting under its consideration of Z, which we know for sure is the discounted value of, you know, Y prepped and ready, and then, okay, we're going to put the turf in. Town meeting, we told you we'd ask you about the turf. We're going to ask you if you want to pay for this. You know, you don't have to pay for it. We'll either do with, you know, we'll do something else, or we'll privately fundraise for it. Lucy. Oh, I thought, Mike, sorry.
And look, we had the special town meeting, and we laid out a menu of options. And look, we never get to make decisions ever, or seldom, not many that I know of, with perfect information. And at the time, sitting in the audience and listening to this get discussed on the floor of town meeting, we didn't have a lot of information, in particular around the turf fields. I think the perception at the time was that the turf fields were going to be much more expensive than grass, it certainly was not discussed at all that the usage we would be able to get was 2 to 3 times as much, and we wouldn't need second fields. And so I understand and I respect that we laid this out in a menu fashion, but I'd also submit that we did that because we did not have all the information that we have available to us today. And specifically as it relates to the turf, we now have information that basically tells us from a cost perspective it's more or less a wash. From a usage perspective, we get much more usage, so as we move forward with what's a big investment, we get more bang for our buck from the turf. And I think there's been a lot of studies that have also shown that you can say that, I've heard people say they don't want their kids playing on turf, but there's also a lot of chemicals that get dumped into grass fields too. And so I just think that we laid it out this way at that special town meeting, or because we did not have the information we have today. And now that we have that, if we were to reconstruct that, I don't think we would have the turf as a separate option, because the evidence financially and otherwise is compelling that it is the best option for the investment we're about to make as a town.
And that's why I think it becomes so difficult to break these two articles apart, because the project, as it makes financial sense, is really Y and Z. And the language, I think, that I keep referring to in this warrant article, this is the 2011 town meeting warrant, special town meeting warrant article. It says, in addition to the base recommendation, the 2011 field committee and the school committee will consider and make recommendations about the inclusion of additional features, including lights and synthetic turf. Citizen hearings will be conducted before any plans that include these features are brought forth for future town meeting consideration. So, you're reading it sort of narrowly. I'm reading it to say, wait a minute, I asked you to go study this. I asked you to think about including these features. I asked you to have a public process about it, and I asked you to come back and make some recommendations. And I agree with Mike that at the time I thought this would look very different than it does, but because of what we've learned, I think that's what's generated what we have. And I do think there is a material choice before town meeting. There's been a motion. There's been now an amendment proposed to the motion that would call for an appropriation. Mary, did you get the number again?
What is the number?
No. I'll give you the number in a second. Carol, can you give me the number for a grass field? And we'll add in, we'll call it $200,000 for drainage. And do you have a figure for an estimate for the associated design expenses that would?
So I would estimate the deduction, which was $454, I think, in your package, okay. And then the $200,000 that Bill referenced.
Right. So you add that back. You take out $454. You add back in $200,000.
Yeah.
Right?
No, you don't.
No,
you don't take off 454 from 3.7. That's not.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, and then a design fee would be.
And permitting.
And permitting. I mean, I would suggest at least. I mean, it's what the synthetic field does is mitigate the entire drainage issue. It's really.
I realize that.
So it's redesigning the entire drainage underneath the field. So I would, and it's installing. We talked to Bill. Basically, it's installing large catch basins. I mean, I would say $100,000 for design fees. We paid $275 for what you have before you, and we just approved some more. So.
Okay. What was the prior to the amendment? What was the number on the?
$3,765,180 is the Article Y appropriation request.
Okay.
So your amendment is how much?
Basically.
Well, it'd be plus 200 plus 100, which would be 4065. But if we're going to start adding in costs, it doesn't really stop there. I mean, what's the cost of waiting 2 years to use the field, and the cost of only having one field versus 2 to 3. I mean, if we're going to start,
I don't think that's an appropriation.
Start nitpicking on the costs, there's a lot of incremental costs that are going to pretty quickly get us to the 4.219.
You're going to have
compromise. Can we all agree that the cost of the grass field would be at least equivalent to the cost of the synthetic field?
Yes.
I would agree with that.
Yes.
Then I'll use the same figure, up to, use that figure.
So, but if that's what you're gonna do, then what you have to add to Y is the 454.
Correct.
You have to go to the 4.219.
And I think there needs to
Yeah,
be
exactly.
a concise, I mean, we've all lived with this, and some of you much more than others, for years. And there has to be, I think, a concise, I hate to call it story, but logic laid out in terms of, as you just said, Mike, the information that was gathered over time clearly showed perhaps what was different than anticipated, and we've ended up with a situation where the costs are at least equal. We're still going to have to get a final cost when the bid documents are put out. And then we would leave Article Z intact in terms of determining the whole component.
And then isn't it, and I'm just thinking out loud here, which is dangerous, but isn't it a bit disingenuous in the fact that we really have no intention of putting in a grass field? I mean, it's our intention to mitigate the drainage issues and the Title IX issues.
That has to be part of the rationale in terms of that, in terms of doing the work and the studies, that the artificial turf field not only is equal in cost, but solves all these other issues as well, including usage, drainage, all of those things.
And Karen,
And then as public servants, are we doing a disservice to the town by making a recommendation that isn't appropriate? It's not appropriate. What's appropriate is the plan that mitigates the drainage, and the menu items are those that we offered in regard to financing and the amenity of lights.
I have a hard time, Dan, I appreciate where you're at, but I have a hard time recommending this number for two reasons. Number one, I'm not sure it's adequate. And number two, I think it then takes away from town meeting the ability to appropriate this 454. I think they've got an appropriate, then they have this appropriation.
Let's see how my motion to amend does. It
Okay,
may not be
then
something we
motion-
have to worry about.
It's a motion for $4,219,200, so Article Y.
4,219,000, I had 4,219,180, but if your math is 200, that's fine.
I took the 454,020 from Article Z.
Okay, that's fine.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor
Can I ask a question? If this motion is for $4,219,200, and Article Z is for $454,020, town meeting could effectively vote yes for both.
For both, right.
Yes. And I guess what I'm just wondering is that really a good idea?
Okay, so that, again, there's my
Okay.
conundrum, but
Okay.
we got, I really think we got to bring
Let's vote the motion.
So, there's been a motion to amend, it's been seconded, it's for an amount of, say it again?
$4,219,200.
All those in favor of Article Y with an appropriation of $4,219,200, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Okay, motion to amend fails.
Do you need a
Brings us,
vote on that or no?
you know what, you guys
Oh, it
can
doesn't
vote
matter.
no on the main motion if you want, and be recorded on that. There's a motion now on the floor for Article Y. Tom, could you read the appropriation
Actually,
again?
I'm sorry, can I be recorded on that last one?
No,
Why
because,
not?
no, because what I'm going to have you do is be recorded on Y, unless you intend to vote for Y.
Yeah.
Because there's no, the amendment failed, so there's nothing really before us. There's no
Okay, that's
no
fine,
action,
yeah,
you know
yeah,
what I'm
you're right,
saying?
okay,
Okay.
yes, thank you.
Okay, so now,
The appropriation is $3,765,180.
and that will include the installation, but not the cost of a turf field, with recommended motion language to be approved by bond council. All those in favor of Article Y as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no?
No.
Okay, let's get a hand, let's get a count.
Count for no.
Yeah. All those in, okay, you got the
Would
notes?
anyone like to be recorded?
Yes.
Yes.
All four?
Okay, and all,
I'm sorry, when you're ready.
all those in favor for a count? All those in favor?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Thank you. Yes.
And if it's possible, I would ask that the minutes reflect that my no vote is based upon the fact that the recommended motion calls for a turf field when the article didn't, and I don't think, yeah, okay. But
Yeah,
I don't know.
You recorded against it.
That's
so,
fine.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Fair enough.
I
All right.
will- I think I will reflect that
In the minutes.
Thanks. So,
Okay, Article Z. You might remember Article Z. Tom, would you care to make a motion on Article Z?
Well, yeah, I recommend that we take no action.
Okay. There has been a recommendation for no action on Article Z.
This is strictly the appropriation of $454,020. And my rationale is that it is deemed to be an amenity. It reduces the town overall cost, and I think it should be paid private.
Okay. Is anyone interested in making an affirmative motion with respect to Article Z?
Yes.
Okay. What is your affirmative motion?
My affirmative motion is that the town raise and appropriate, borrow or transfer from available funds a sum of $454,020 to be expended under the direction of the school committee to fund the installation of a field turf or similar artificial surface as part of the construction of a new multipurpose playing field in connection with Phase 2 of the high school fields improvement project.
Okay,
Second.
so I don't know exactly how to do this, because Tom made a motion for no action, and I'm wondering, usually on the floor of town meeting, the affirmative motion takes priority. Dick, can you help me on this?
I don't know the answer to that.
Usually when our motion is for no, if we have a motion for no action, usually if the proponents or somebody else makes an affirmative motion, that's the motion that takes priority. So I'm going to follow that procedure here and then come back to the no action. I've never had this happen before. So.
I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with going with somebody else making a recommendation on this. And
Okay. Okay, so there's been a recommendation for 454,020 on Article Z. All those in favor of that appropriation, request for appropriation, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no?
No.
Okay, we need to count that.
Count again.
Ayes, ayes.
6, 7, 8. And noes. Do I capture recording noes?
Yes, recording for notes?
Recorded no?
Yep.
Good.
Or 2 recorded no? Yep. Okay, so all 5 no votes are recorded.
What was the count?
So the count was 8 in favor and 5 opposed.
Okay. Okay.
A couple of abstentions then?
Well, Jim isn't here.
Jim isn't here and Karen.
Okay.
Are you ready for a vote on AA?
Yes.
Okay. I recommend that the town allow the erection and installation of 4 80-foot-high light poles at designated location identified on the design plans for the multi-purpose playing field intended to be constructed at the high school in connection with the high school fields improvement project under the direction and control of the school committee.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor of allowing the installation of lights at the high school field, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no?
No.
Okay, we're going to count for the ayes.
Count for the ayes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Noes?
And noes. So the count is 8 affirmative, 5 opposed. Recorded?
Yep.
Bill? Recorded? No?
Yes.
So all 5 recorded, no.
And, you ready, Mary? I'd like to turn to Greg McCune to make a motion with respect to Article BB.
I move that we take no action on Article BB.
Second.
Okay, similar to the no action recommendation with respect to the Article Z. Is there anybody who would like to make an affirmative action with respect to Article BB? Okay.
Sorry, let me pull it out. All right. Okay,
No, but I need an appropriation amount.
will the town raise and appropriate, borrow, transfer from available sum? Oh, sorry. Will the town raise and appropriate, borrow, or transfer available funds a sum? Do we have to do this one? This one.
I mean, the cost in their presentation was $4 million.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Will the town raise and appropriate, borrow, or transfer from available funds a sum of $4,005,022 to be expended on the direction of the school committee to fund Phase 2 of the high school field improvement project located at 17 Union Street, Hingham, Massachusetts?
Is there a second to the affirmative motion?
I'll second.
Okay, there's an affirmative motion on the floor for Article BB, an appropriation in the amount of $4,005,022. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no?
No.
Motion fails. There's a motion for no action with respect to Article BB. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no?
No.
Okay.
No.
So
you're being recorded now on the BB no action motion.
Could I just get the notes for the BB no action? 3? Recorded?
Sure.
No, okay.
Sure.
Okay, that concludes our business with respect to the high school field article. I appreciate the attendance. Thank you for coming. Thanks for both parties for all your work on this. I understand that we're not ready to move forward with respect to the easement on Whitney Wharf, so you feel free, you're not going to miss anything on that? Okay. Are there any liaison updates? If there are no liaison updates, I'll remind you that we are not meeting tomorrow. I know you're going to be disappointed. We will meet on the 14th. That meeting, we've got to clean up anything that's left over. So we've got a bunch of warrant articles. Mary has made a plea. I'll make another plea. If you are finished, if your motion is finished, you really need to get your comments to her as soon as possible. I'm trying to move stuff along now, back through Mary to Betty. If stuff comes in at the end of the week, it's going to be really, really difficult. So, like,
I have mine.
Okay.
Today I couldn't get the red lines off it, which is why highly technical, yeah. But it's done.
But your article's really important.
I know.
It's got to go to bond council.
Again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody have any questions on anything else? Good job tonight, everybody. I thought, you know what, it was long. I think that we did a good job thinking about the issues. Okay.
I hope we're still on TV when Karen said that.
Ben, are we still on? All right. So